Okay, we're live. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to those who are traveling for Thanksgiving. And
Like you.
So today we're gonna continue the discussion from last week, specifically about Sven Beckert, his new book about capitalism, a global history, and relate that also to our ongoing discussion of the American Revolution of 1776 with Ken Burns' documentary, which also has just come out recently. And then we're going to tie that into our discussions about 2026 in general and our plans for the future. And yeah, it's a special free school today, in no small part because our friend Shimbarto, who's been introducing free school every week, this is not his last free school, but yeah, he's not going to be in person for the time being because he's going home to India, and we hope that he's back soon. But yeah, I know that people in the chat have probably gotten used to hearing him introduce, so yeah, I wanted to give a heads up. But yeah, with that, I'll turn it over to Doc.
Okay, good morning, and I don't know, not seeing you, Sambarto, for a little while. Yeah, just for a brief period. You will return for reasons that we've discussed a little bit. As everyone knows, next year is the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. This will be a period, this whole year will be a period of intense ideological struggle, which we, the Free School, must be a part of. And of course, we will be, and we know how to be. This is also the 250th anniversary, more or less, of the Industrial Revolution, where global capitalism takes off to another stage. So this will be very important. Today, I want to talk about two of the foundations of the ideological and theoretical moment. Sven Beckert's book, Capitalism, A Global History, which it'll help you build up your arms by carrying it around. It's a huge book, 1,000 pages of text, and almost 300 pages of footnotes. But it is not one of those books that you wouldn't enjoy reading because it's well written, well researched, of a man who himself is well educated. And this makes all the difference in the world. It's not just a big book, but it's a big book that you can learn something from. I'll talk a bit about that. You know, just about the political crisis. We have reached a political stalemate in this country. It would seem that a political stalemate has been reached in terms of world events or world conflicts. To many people, the dilemmas and paradoxes of this time seem unresolvable. I would say going into 2026, that this is a moment of unprecedented ideological consequence. Now, it's hard to say or to predict what the future will look like, but it seems that a number of events and processes have now reached a head, and what comes next might be decided by what will eventuate from this moment. One of the problems, however, we enter into a new period of intense ideological and theoretical struggle, but I would say for the most part, the intelligentsia, the academics, the progressives and what are called revolutionaries, or what people who call themselves revolutionaries, are very unprepared ideologically for this moment. And a good part of them, to disguise how unprepared they are, have abandoned the front of ideological combat. A big part of them have defined themselves as activists, and many people incorrectly associate activism with being a revolutionary. Nothing is further from the truth. But then there are intervening forces that no one could have predicted, such as social media, YouTube videos, where a good part of the intelligentsia has adopted a strategy of popularity, monetizing whatever they do, and generally turning from serious intellectual work to performance. In fact, these performances in YouTube videos have become a strategy for the achievement of academic success and tenure. Some people will even make the claim that I get thousands of hits on YouTube videos, and this represents the fact that I should get tenure, you know. So popularity has become a substitute for deep thinking and investigation. The other thing is everybody today is a geostrategist who know more about the grand chess game, as it is called, than they do about the logics of social transformation and the logics of revolution. They don't even discuss it. And it is quite telling that some concepts or certain concepts that we regularly use, such as systemic complexity, seems to me that that's just such a normal concept in a time like this, to look at systems, you know, and to look at them as complex systems, or to talk about systemic crisis or complex logics to understand systemic crises. You know, such language and conceptualization is indispensable for understanding modern complex societies, which I will return to. The other thing, because they don't understand complexity in social systems and systemic phenomenon and logics, nor epistemologies, they cannot understand the people, nor the immiseration of the people, or mass incarceration. What goes for a great deal or big part of academic research and discussion is not that much different than journalism. You know, they can repeat over and over and over again what event happened yesterday or last week, or what did Putin's body language in his meeting with Trump mean, and so on. So they are chroniclers of the immediate, rather than understanding what are the processes that brought the immediate into being. So we're all, at this point, deeply dissatisfied with the emptiness of what is called political, ideological, and intellectual discourse. Even when some of them have belatedly discovered Du Bois and believe that a 3-week or maybe a 3-month class on him like one would have at a university, would allow you to know him and the consequences of his work. As you know, the Free School has spent years on Du Bois and are still using Du Bois as a fundamental resource in the theoretical and ideological understanding of capitalism and the crisis of this time. You know, and I was just saying to Alice and to Michelle that our work in logic, all of our work in logic, syllogisms, dialectics, trialectics, inductive, deductive logics, logics of investigation, historical logics, logics of social structure, all of this work is indispensable to knowing the world and knowing this society. Not to mention our ethnographic work in the studies of deindustrialization, which is also, it's ethnographic, but it's spatial, geographic, and we'll find this as we enter upon our next stage of the study of deindustrialization, where plants were located, where neighborhoods were located, where churches were located. And it's so interesting that in Philadelphia, an ecosystem of church, community, family, factory, class, consciousness, all of this is this rich fabric for sociological study. And without knowing this, you can't think about a future because you don't know the people. And more than ever, the future will be decided by people, not academics, not politicians, but by people. But we'll come back to that. You know, I'm regularly asked, Tony, where are you going with all of this? A lot of people, I know you all perhaps couldn't understand this because, you know, you met me at this stage in my life, but people who know me at other stages, well, Tony, what are you doing now? You know, why are you with all these young people and these young Asians? I mean, what you doing? Have you abandoned Black? They ask me this. And when they don't ask me, the way they're looking at me, they're asking me anyway, because I would love to answer all of these questions, but you know, but the Free School will, in this next year, be a decisive part of the people's understanding and discussion of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. We are so fortunate to live in this city, which will be a big part of whatever is celebrated, because it was here that the Declaration of Independence is written, you know, with the immortal lines, we declare these truths that all men are created equal. That sentence cascades through the centuries to this point to influence the consciousness of humanity. We know enough, we're organized enough, we have the theory, we really do, it's almost embarrassing. Let me put it this way, where all of us in Philly and the supporters of Free School, the detractors from Free School, the frauds and perpetrators of frauds, we reach a moment where of all the organizations of the people, that organization which is best qualified to address the problems, contradictions, ambiguities, uncertainties, and so on, that came forward in the American Revolution, we are best able to think through a lot of this. And I would say, because of this and because of the record of free school and working with community organizations and so on, we will be welcomed to do this work, and we must do this work. You know, people ask me all of these questions. Oh, what are you doing, Tony? Why are you in free school? Why are y'all studying logic and Hegel? And why are y'all so devoted to Du Bois? And, you know, I have to tell you, people really don't understand or recognize me. If they knew me, well, back in, I can't say the question is, what of my days? Let's say the most recent of back in my days. I have to say that back in part of my days, in the beginning of free school, when I was with Samir and Serafina, we are the OGs of the free school. It's so funny to think about. Look at you. Is this the Samir that I met in 2015, running up and down the street? You know, but we won't get to it's. Yeah, we'll talk more about it. And Sarah, oh God. But I have to say I'm honored that you all have shared your lives with me and your love. I am humbled by this. I learn and am inspired by your dedication and sacrifice. And even, you know, I have to say that I really appreciate, you know, y'all celebrating my 80th birthday, because I felt at the end of the day, which I'll say again made me feel comfortable with it, that it was not just me. I would have been completely embarrassed, you know, to have people talking about me and you this and no, because frankly, the next step would have been to order my tombstone and where I was going to be buried, because if I was all that, then I had no more growth, no more whatever. And frankly, I don't feel that way at all. But I think the other thing, and I want to be clear, and I want to make this clear to whoever's listening, that in a lot of ways, what you see of me is a result of the people that I'm involved with. One of the things, and I know I'm trying to set up this discussion of the Ken Burns documentary and the Beckert book. I think you would find it very interesting, Joe. I'll explain why. It's your type of book. It is really your, but let me do this.
Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
You ever read anything by Professor Carol Quigley, Tragedy and Hope?
No, I haven't.
Have you heard about it?
I haven't, but let's come back to that in a minute. But as I was reading the first 100 pages of this, knowing how you think and the way you process information and knowledge, I was thinking about you and wanting to discuss it with you, which means then that we're going to have to set up appointments at Reading Terminal over cups of coffee and begin talking about this.
You know I'm twisted.
Huh?
You know I'm twisted up here.
You twisted?
You know I'm twisted up here.
You mean
I'm twisted up here in a certain way. I'm twisted. I'm bent up here in a certain way.
Okay.
That's why I get it wrong.
Okay, but we'll come back to this. But the thing is, that's been so important about the work of the Free School in recent times has been our emphasis in the ideological struggle and the political crisis of the need for science in all of its forms, in all of its deployments, in all of its logic. We have said almost emphatically that there's a need for sociology Beckert confirms this in his book. I'll explain that. A need for epistemology, a need for historiography, a need for history, a need for the history of consciousness. We have put all of this on the table. And now in 2026, in this consequential discussion of not just 1776, but the future of the nation and of democracy, I think we are best positioned to take this discussion to new and more profound levels. And just finally on this point, we have said it over and over and over again, and I think world events as well as events in this country point to what we have called an all-humanity united front for peace and revolutionary democracy. If we're going to study the American Revolution and the claim made that it brings forward a new type of democracy, we could make the claim, standing on the shoulders of Du Bois and King and the whole Black movement and the whole progressive movement, that we are now beyond 1776 and 250 years later. What we're talking about is humanity as such and the struggle for peace and a new revolutionary democracy. You know, in the great debate, and it will involve millions and tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of people just in this country, not to mention around the world. India and China and Vietnam and Ghana and South Africa, they want to know what this is all about and where and when it went wrong. We will be able, because we understand the meaning and consequences of the defeat of Reconstruction, we will be able to explain the Third American Revolution as a revolution, as a struggle for a new, in fact, revolutionary democracy. And I was just saying to Jeremiah, I was congratulating him on his essay I just read on the Third American Revolution, Why We Must Inherit It. Great piece. And of course, Blaze's piece on John Brown. This is all important research and foundational research for the ways that we will think, and hopefully many more will think about these things. The other thing is, I think what characterizes the free school is that we are not fearful of the future or of the present for that matter. We are not frightened by contradictions and ambiguities and uncertainties, and we're not afraid of being wrong. We look at things, and I want to use this word, Ferdinand Braudel, coming out of the French school of historical writing called the Annales.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Serafina likes words. You like this one. The theory of the longue durée. Serafina, you might be able to revive hip hop and rap.
Oh my God.
Yeah, this is just parenthetical.
Okay.
You know, the recent articles in trade, entertainment trade, newspapers and magazines showing a precipitous decline in the popularity of hip hop. And even Kendrick Lamar has not made a big dent. And on, the Billboard Top 100, no hip hop record in 2023-24 went above 40. I think this is hugely significant in terms of freeing the consciousness of young people. So in this year, we will also have to be prepared for that, because if that is not an anchor in the ideological lives of young people, then what will be the anchor? We have to be there to help them find it. But there are two major works that appear almost at the same time at the end of this year, on the cusp of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, and as I've said, the Industrial Revolution. Two major works that for the last at least couple weeks I've been struggling with. Sven Beckert's book, Capitalism, A Global History, and Ken Burns's The American Revolution. They're both big pieces of work, and they're intellectual and knowledge contributions that cannot be cast aside. By the way, anyone or any group that casts this aside, this 250th anniversary, for whatever reasons, have condemned themselves to be impotent and insignificant in the ideological history of the people. I thought you said you're one of the people that cast it aside.
A little bit. I have personal baggage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but, no, because I'm from
Yeah.
from the Boston.
Yeah.
We can talk about it later.
Yeah. Okay.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
I didn't know you had personal baggage about this.
But we can talk.
Okay, but we'll come
It's
back
not
to it.
important.
That's okay. I just want to say something about the American Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. They occur at the same time. The Industrial Revolution constitutes a takeoff point for global capitalism to consolidate itself as a system of production. It is, and I'm using the words of the evolutionary biologist, I forget his name. Gould, yes, Stephen Gould. What do I do without you? Stephen Gould's concept of punctuated equilibrium. Even though Beckert does not use the word, it's obvious that it can be deployed to understand those moments of rupture when something new comes into human history. The American Revolution, therefore, is not only a political revolution, it is a revolution that takes place in the context of a revolution of economic relations. And it is a qualitative change. And if nothing else, the American Revolution represents the first, and yes, the most mature to that point, of the bourgeois democratic revolutions, to be followed by the French, the Haitian, and then the great liberation movements going forward. No one living then, in spite of the machinations of the British, which I'll talk about, said, well, we shouldn't have had this revolution. We should have let King George settle all of this. And yes, we can talk of this moment when it became clear that a new axial age had begun sometime before, but was crystallized in this moment. The axial age that we call modernity. It is however one chooses to delineate it. This is either the third or fourth axial age, an age where the axis of human civilization shifts. And that shift is irreversible. Hence, no 19th or 20th century, or I would think 21st century revolutionary, cannot acknowledge this. It is fatal from an intellectual and ideological standpoint for anyone interested in social change to act like the American Revolution was a counter-revolution or didn't mean anything anyway. That type of nihilism is, well, to put it one, is unbecoming to anyone who's interested in profound, not to mention revolutionary change. It's unbecoming. I mean, you know, for me, I have to say, it's not only unbecoming, I'm just, I asked the question, well, are you on crack? I mean, you're going to act like no other revolutionaries ever existed before you came, when in fact every revolutionary of the 20th century, I don't care what their overall worldview was, acknowledges this period of punctuated equilibrium. In other words, a new equilibrium, a new axial moment, a new identity for the world movement started. But the American Revolution is part of a larger, longue durée, where that eventuates in the American Revolution. Beckert goes back 1,000 years to the earliest trading networks. And he starts with Aden in Yemen. And he's trading what he calls nodes. I was so interested in him using it, because I use that all the time. It's very sociological. These other words that made me feel comfortable with the book, familiar with the book. I'll give you some of that. He looks at this in the long duration. So 1,000 years is the long durée. Starting with trading, networks, families, religious groups, cultures, most urban, but a mercantile or trading system evolved. First, in what was then the Muslim and Arab world, and so the early trading system is stamped by Islamic and Arab cultures. But it was not, that was just the center. But these trading systems in this period, although there were trading systems far before that, the trans-Sahara trade from West Africa to the Arabian Peninsula, which is not as old as some of the nodes and trading systems that Beckert talks about, but it goes into Russia, into China, India, the Swahili coast of East Africa, and over 1,000 years this developed. The American Revolution appears at something like its 750th year, you know? Let's start with Ken Burns. I watched the documentary and want to watch it again, and I hope that we can set some time aside to watch it together. There's a lot that I never knew about the American Revolution, so much that one would want to know about the revolution is hidden, veiled in all of this celebration of the founding fathers, you know what I'm saying? And this was something God ordained and could never happen again, and all, you know, Betsy Ross's house and Independence Hall and the flag, and you know, so it's so crude and so disrespectful of people's intellect that you just don't want to even talk about it. Oh, the 4th of July, let's go to the bar and get drunk. You know, that's what most people say. What is there to celebrate? We've heard it over and over and over again, but Black people say, and we're still not free. You know, so a certain cynicism sets in, and I was guilty of that, and I'm guilty of it. But this documentary, again, is a paradigm shift. How profound, I can't say at this point, but it is a paradigm shift. And let me explain right off the top. One, while it makes central to the narrative the military struggle between the army led by George Washington and the British Army, consumes a big part of what the American Revolution was. But because without the military victory, there would have been no American Revolution. The Brits would have won, you know? That having been said, the documentary points out that the American Revolution was the product of global forces, which Beckert documents in his book on global capitalism. That at least 1,000 years of the ideological preparation, not to mention the development of a global system of trade and investment and the accumulation of capital for profit, was necessary to set the stage for the American Revolution. Jefferson, in particular, is a man of the Enlightenment. Did that mean that he was God, he solved all the problems, or that he wasn't a slave owner? None of that. He was, however, a man of the Enlightenment, of the ideas of the Enlightenment, which, as we have spoken, was also a man of the Renaissance, and Leonardo da Vinci and the Dutch painters and so on. They were deist, D-E-I-S-T, not theist. They believed, well, that there was a God. I guess they would say, I guess I believe there's a God that created all of this. But after that, everything is about man. It's what we call the Anthropocene. That moment in history, I don't know whether it's in the first Stone Age or what Stone Age, but where the earth is increasingly shaped by what human beings do. That geography and all of this, while not completely, is increasingly shaped by the human presence on the earth. What I'm getting at, the American Revolution, even as told by Ken Burns, is a culminating point of the Renaissance, Enlightenment, the Protestant Reformation. All of these ideas and all of this ideological, and I would say civilizational preparation, the American Revolution made concrete in a revolution where a new class, we can call it a bourgeoisie, a capitalist class, was prepared to take power and took power, even when the odds were decidedly against them. If you just sat down and did an AI calculation, let us say, can the American revolutionaries win against the great British Army and Navy? And you put all the factors in and you ask AI to come up with several scenarios. I bet you that AI would have come up with the fact that there's no way the probabilities of the American revolutionaries winning are very small. Mm-hmm. Britain was a unified state. Unified, I mean, really. The Americans were 13 colonies, beset by all kinds of splits and differences, including splits over slavery, even in the minds of several of the people who were American revolutionaries who owned slaves, like Jefferson, like Benjamin Franklin, not to mention George Washington. Where throughout the American Revolution, what Burns shows is that there's something like a feedback loop where they enter the revolutionary struggle with one set of views about Britain, let us say, that we don't want to break with Britain, we just want to have more freedom and not be taxed out of our heads to sustain the British Navy. You know, we enter the revolution with that. And by the time it's over, we're thinking about the world very differently. But that's natural. Even in 1776, for the Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia, to adopt the words of Thomas Jefferson, we declare these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That's the first sentence. And not to be taken lightly, with all of the contradictions of Jefferson and of the entire situation. But these contradictions will not be resolved in the head of one person. They will be resolved in history and in struggle. But you said it. Now I'm going to add meat to the bones of your words. That's Frederick Douglass, that's Martin Luther King. Not that I hate you for saying it and not living up to it.
Yeah.
They never approached it that way. The Burns documentary is therefore again a paradigm shift. Let me explain why. Just at the visual level of the documentary, it is not commentated by all these old white professors from Harvard and Yale and Cornell and University of Pennsylvania. It is a diverse group of people, several of whom are not even academic historians and are interpreters of events that we call the American Revolution. The documentary centralizes the Native Americans over the Africans at this time because the British, like the French, like the Spanish, like the Dutch, all saw America and the New World as the El Dorado.
Right, right.
You know, I mean, and you can only imagine coming from a place like London where it's damp and dark and dirty and stinking and shit, to come here and to see all of this and to say, the only problem is it's occupied by people and we want it. That's not everybody, by the way. But, and so all of the contradictions that emerge in this struggle with the British by people who saw themselves as British. They didn't see themselves as American to start out with. The other thing, Ken Burns begins the story of the American Revolution with the 7 Years' War.
Yeah.
1756 to 1763, sometimes called the French Indian War.
Yeah.
He begins, 20 years
Yeah.
before the Declaration of Independence. And what he is saying is that the landscape or the table was being set. The French, who were competitors with the English, wanted the west of the United States. You all got the Atlantic coast. We want everything beyond the Appalachians, Ohio, maybe Indiana. The Spanish wanted the South, you know, the French also. But then the most profitable part of all of these empires was in the Caribbean. Sugar was the cash crop. So for the British, the south of the United States prior to the rise of cotton was not the central economic interest. But in the competition with these other European imperial powers, the whole of this territory was important. And how to manage, from the British standpoint, the appropriation and occupation of all of this. Could they do it with the American colonists? You know, I won't go into all the details of this, but nonetheless. So the way he presents who talks about this is not the normal cast of characters. And there are a lot of Native Americans talking about their history and the plight of their people. The other thing that comes across in this documentary, which you don't get from normal celebratory discourses, is that big parts of what were the cities of the colonial America, for example, Richmond, Virginia, maybe Boston, Massachusetts, were cities that were integrated with free blacks, Native Americans, and white people. Another thing that comes up is the contradictions of the Native Americans, because you had all these nations and tribes.
Yeah.
Everybody wasn't, oh, we're Native American. No, they were different peoples. And even within, I think, the Cherokees, probably the largest and politically most important of the East Coast Indians, there were contradictions of how to fight the white man. And these contradictions tore asunder the possibility of a united front.
Yeah.
Now, the Beckert book. As you can see, I'm carrying it around. It's not because I'm trying to, work on my pecs or whatever. It's a heavy book. And I had no intentions of taking on a 1,000-page book. I'm just not that into books anymore.
Yeah, you said that last week.
Yeah. Did you say?
You did say you were not into books last week or something.
I did. Yeah. Well, this, long chance, But I had no intentions of taking this on. 1,000 pages of text and almost 300 pages of footnotes. And frankly, when I say footnotes, it's not just referencing a book or essay. I mean, it's long explanations. And you can almost sometimes read the text and not read the footnotes and then say, well, I'll go back to read the footnotes when I finish the chapter. Of the 100 pages that I've read, and even if you can't get into the 100 pages right away, I recommend the introduction, where he kind of lays out his approach. In some ways, I consider him a bit naive about certain questions, which I'll explain. But he follows a line of scholarship that has documented and chronicled the trading system that goes back 1,000 years. He draws upon that. He says out the gate that he will not do what is normally done, and that is a Eurocentrist theory or history of the development of capitalism. Most of what we have read, including the Marxist studies, have been deeply Eurocentrist. That's been one of our criticisms of Marxism and of the Enlightenment, that he says we will not do this. That to understand this global movement, you have to begin with the Islamic world, with the Arab world, and with what we today call the global South. Somehow, and I'm not yet at the point where he explains this, the major productive and technological forces that would take capitalism forward are disproportionately located in the global North, Europe and the United States in particular. How that happened, why it happened, I haven't gotten to his explanation yet. This is a very important thing because the system begins as a global trading system. So why wouldn't capitalism first develop in the global South, where it seemed for most of this first 500 years, most of the capital, most of the productive forces are located. But that, we'll wait to see how he explains that. He says that the major influences upon this work and his research are Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, Karl Marx, for obvious reasons. And, I've said before that the guy is an underground Marxist, that his framing of things is indebted to Marxian political economy and historiography, although not alone. I'll explain that too. And Max Weber, the German sociologist that wrote Capitalism in the Spirit of Protestantism.
Spirit of Protestantism.
Yeah. He then says also that he has a debt to Ferdinand Braudel, which is the long theory of history. However, missing is Du Bois, to whom he is ultimately indebted. And I think a case will be made. A case can be made that the foundational theoretical work is Du Bois. Now, in his New York Times essay of a week ago, he does mention Du Bois and the general strike.
Right.
But Du Bois is, although Du Bois is a ghost hovering all over the work. Similarly, with Burns's documentary, especially the Black commentators, I could just see in them, they're thinking, well, they're talking about Jefferson and Washington, in the back of their minds, Frederick Douglass Du Bois, Frederick Douglass Du Bois. You know what I'm saying? You could see it. So there's this ghost which cannot yet, or who cannot yet be identified, that is hovering all over this, and that is the great Du Bois. And frankly, as I looked at the documentary and as I read Beckert's book, I can see, I think that we are right in the idea of Du Bois initiating a new history of thought. Du Bois is just that large. And I say this, it's confirmed when I look at Beckert, you know, the global foundations of capital. Well, please, I mean, Du Bois, even as early as his PhD dissertation on the suppression of the African slave trade, or his speech a couple years later at the American Negro Academy called The Conservation of Races, where, and then of course The World in Africa, and so much of what he has done situates the African at the center of all of this. But here is where I think Beckert might evidence an element of dishonesty. You know, what does he get from Marx? Well, he gets a lot of things from Marx. I won't go into all of it right now. But a part of it is the crystallization of modern classes, bourgeois and capitalists. But then in his narrative, he will say time and time again that at the center of the new system and the creation of the new wealth is what we would call the Black proletariat. But he does not know how to integrate Du Bois into really the Marxian framework. Just doesn't know how to do it. And it would be, frankly, very subversive and might compromise his ability to sell the work, to sell the book. So it seems it could either be a decision made by publishers or others, a political decision, that it might be best not to go full hog with Du Bois. But Marx, yes. Adam Smith, yes. Max Weber. I think that makes, but that, in what I'm considering to be a very honest work by a man who's generally honest and operates in good faith, not to, and even if you look at the index, there are only a couple places where he cites Du Bois. I mean, about 3 places in the index. But this Du Bois is the framework. Even so much so that even he, in his New York Times essay, had to admit that the end of the slave system rode upon the shoulders of the slaves themselves rebelling up to and including the general strike of 1863, 64. Now, just quickly, a lot of questions are going to be raised. At the top of the agenda is the 1619 Project, the counter-revolution of 1776, and on the one side, the left, by which we mean the white, intellectual, academic left for the most part, is not going to know how to deal with this. And the reason they're not going to know how to deal with it, because they do not have a vision for the future. The only way to make sense of this documentary is to put it in a long history where 1776 and this documentary itself is part of what must be a futuristic conceptualization. Unless you see a future, that doesn't mean like our future will be realized. We don't know. But unless you look at this from the standpoint of a future for the American people, you cannot understand either the documentary or the revolution. I'll just end on this. We are very fortunate to be in Philadelphia. This will be the center of the discussion of this revolutionary struggle. The world will be looking at Philadelphia in order to understand this. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Again, we are well positioned to enter into this. There are institutions all over the city that are the direct product of the American Revolution, including the free library system.
Yeah.
And Mother Bethel AME Church, and in some ways the church that we're sitting in right now. So history is all around us. And the spirits of those people who came before us and made this history are all over us. And lastly, Du Bois is very much a part of the history and sociology of Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Negro is and should be understood as a work that comes out of the spirit of the American Revolution and is dedicated to resolving its fundamental contradictions. In this sense, going forward, we cannot separate Du Bois from the interpretation of the American Revolution. He is, after all is said and done, perhaps the best interpreter of it. Isn't that interesting? It's almost as though we have been preparing for this for the last 5 years. You know, all of our studies, etc. But Martin Luther King cannot be separated from this. If you read or listen to his speeches, his speech, I Have a Dream, his speech or his letter from a Birmingham jail, his Why Oppose the War in Vietnam speech, King, like Du Bois, like Frederick Douglass, are always looking back to the American Revolution as incomplete. And that was a big political divide in the country for years, even up till today. And I would say the epistemologies differ at this point. Do you look at the American Revolution from the standpoint of the future and what it left undone and what we must do? Or do you look at the American Revolution as perfection itself?
Right.
Burns does not look at it as perfection or the people involved, the leaders of it. I'll stop there.
Very early on, you said, you mentioned that people are the chroniclers instead of historians.
Chroniclers, yes.
The academics.
Yes.
And I thought it really reflected the purpose of our method, our criticisms of their method, and the reason why we're studying logic. And it's like they're trying to take snapshots. At this point in time, it was like this. At this point in time, it was like this. Rather than understanding the processes that drive it all forward. And because of that, they're unable to explain how we got here, and then they're unable to explain where we're going. And
It's very important.
And I agreed with that very strongly. And the interesting thing about what we're doing in preschool is we're saying that, man is the master of his conditions. And if we can fashion the conditions, we can fashion man. And rather than have, science that's centered around, earth or logic, or we have a human-centered science, because that's the, at the immediacy that what you were talking about. And then just on a lighter-hearted note, I think that not many people agree with the 250th anniversary celebration in the direction of preschool. But I think, I remember when we did the year of Gandhi, and, not a lot of people agreed with you. And why are we studying Gandhi? This is the preschool. Shouldn't we study someone black? And,
To which I said, we just got finished studying someone black.
Right. Well, I think, looking back, you ended up being right. The year of Gandhi led us naturally to Martin Luther King. And so even though I have my doubts, I'll use myself as an example. I have my doubts. So I had my doubts about the 250th anniversary of the country and its importance. I think that you get a lot of leeway because in the past you've been right. So, but it does make a lot of sense. It's something completely misunderstood, and revisiting it in a human-centered way, especially with what you were saying about the Anthropocene and human beings fashioning geography. Truly, it's a beautiful time to live. Yeah.
May I just, if you don't mind, I agree with you very, very much. And there are 1,001 reasons to be completely negative about the United States, the American Revolution, bourgeois revolutions, period, and the American people, especially at this time of crisis, when there is no clear roadmap of how we move forward. But, like we insist upon almost every week we get together and during the week when we're all not together, that there are many reasons to be optimistic. Not to be unrealistically optimistic, but to see a future. You know, like King said, there is a sky. Or like Baldwin said, how can I not be optimistic? I have children that I have to be responsible for. So we enter the fight, as you say, I think with a very strong hand. You know, and I think all of what we're doing, for example, the deindustrialization studies, and really these black gods, this is hugely significant because, for reasons that we know. If I might just say one thing, and I didn't fully develop it, is the Beckert's use of sociology. I felt very comfortable, and it was very recognizable to me. He uses pretty much French sociologists, and when he uses concepts that we'll see when we do our logical work, embeddedness, nodes, he uses that word all the time, nodes, structures. And if you listen, that's kind of the way I talk, because I have studied these same sociologists, so I know what he's doing, and I know what he's referencing, and this is, I think, very important going forward for the work that we do, our recognition of the significance, even centrality of sociology. Did I say his use of the concept networks? It's very sociological, and the French Bourdieu, I hope I'm pronouncing Bourdieu.
The anthropologist.
Well, he's a
Bourdieu. Wait, Pierre?
Yeah, Bourdieu, Pierre Bourdieu.
Yeah.
Okay. They call him an anthropologist.
He gets brought a sociologist of science.
He is that too, yeah.
But he gets brought up in that through a lot.
Okay, I can see that. But nonetheless, it's this frame, the talk which we do, the talk of structures, structuring structures, complexities. I mean, if you're going to be, that's just what you said, Samir. Unless academic research and so on becomes just another branch of journalism, where I go to archives and read what was written in newspapers of 1823, if that's what I'm doing, then just call me a sophisticated journalist or chronicler of the history of journalism, not the history of consciousness. But go ahead.
Could I just add really quickly? Because what you said about the pessimism after the revolution, so there are many people who will say the Russian and Soviet revolutions are authoritarian because it was striving for freedom, and then it just became this dark, gloomy, authoritarian state bureaucratic thing. But nobody ever says that of the American and French revolutions. I guess at the end it became not what everyone wanted it, idealized it to be, but you have to understand that it was a revolution and that it was a striving for freedom.
It was incomplete. It was filled with contradictions and uncertainties. Frankly, as the story is told in this documentary, I hope we all have a chance to get together for a couple nights and just go through that. It's a lot of work, but a lot of times, the leaders of the American, they didn't know what they were doing or where they were going or what would be the outcome of all of this. And that's a way, I think it's a lesson in understanding revolutions.
It's true.
Well, I was,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, are you finished?
No, I'm finished.
No, I was gonna say that actually it is important that there is this revolutionary history to inherit because, like, let's say you compare the situation of America with Canada, which is like
That's a good.
a nation that hasn't ever struggled for anything, and actually a lot. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but
At least there's not much of a record of struggle.
yeah,
Except to take
or in the
Native
sense
American
that,
land.
yeah, like those that actually ended up in Canada or fled to Canada to not be a part of the struggle, the revolutionary struggle in America. And I think the reason why I say that is because there are actually some Chinese like immigrants that actually moved to Canada as well. And I do think there is a difference between the Chinese Canadians and Chinese Americans where there is a struggle in this country to inherit. And I think the conversation that, or what I'm getting from your introduction and also what Free School has worked on over the years is that there's the first American Revolution. And even this quote of Jefferson's of, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Like those are also very beautiful words that give a sky for striving. But I think a lot of like our education in this country is to speak of the imperfection, but also the developments of it. Meaning, like I think Free School for the past several years has been talking about the chronology of the American Revolution. And even though with 1776, it wasn't complete, there have been attempts to complete it.
Yes.
And I think as part of 2026, the 250th anniversary, like I think a huge contribution of Free School is that perspective of 1776 as something that's futuristic and there has been attempts or progress actually through the Second American Revolution and the Third. Because I think Free School has talked a lot about Reconstruction, which we also will have to revisit, is I think we've also grown in our understanding, but especially with the work of Black Gods and deindustrialization, like really understanding what has made the Black freedom struggle and also the period of industrialization of Philadelphia a second Reconstruction and second advancement that was parallel with the Black freedom struggle or as part of the Black freedom struggle. Because I think we talk a lot about, or we've talked about in previous Free Schools of deindustrialization. But I think part of our studies and part of what we found is not just the attack, but what was present and what was possible before the attack. And especially of what we had said, which is the Black social system as a civilizational system. And the kinds of leaders and that came out of that movement. And even this thing of, I guess, Beckert and Beckett is
Beckert, yes.
Beckett, okay. This global angle as well, because we've been saying, which is with the Black freedom struggle, it was not isolated. It was also at the same time in conjunction with these anti-colonial struggles and this movement of thought, ideological developments throughout the world for freedom, for democracy. And so, yeah, I think it is very true. I think with 2026, there's a lot of opportunity for us actually to shift that narrative of not just 1776 and the contradictions and how it's imperfect, but actually what came out, or what were those actual ideas? Because I do think you're right, which is that the ideas get lost in the figures. And then also the developments that came after and what remains. The developments that came after. Like I think we have an opportunity to shift the ideological landscape and discussion of 1776 in Philadelphia, given the relationships that we've had with different institutions throughout the city, such as the Free Library, such as AME.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really good note, actually, because I had so many thoughts as you were speaking, because
I know I was someone who was interested in seeing what the free school exploration of the 250th anniversary would be. I kind of just felt it more than I could actually put into words, and I was always afraid that we'd fall into certain traps of, getting caught up, because I think there will be a lot of getting caught up in like the frenzy that will take place next year. Because I'll try to circle back to a few things too that I feel like, Alice, what you said made me think of, but I'll start with the fact that I think that it was really helpful how you painted it, Doc, where the moment we are in is one of profound global crisis, both stalemate, but also so much yearning to actually resolve it. And the thing is, the ruling elite knows that this anniversary is one where all these open sores and wounds of like these open questions are like staring back at them, and they need to reassert ideological hegemony again. Hence the need that, like, I even think that, to be honest, the election last year of 2024 between, I guess it was ultimately like Kamala Harris versus Trump, was one that was like, who is going to be supposedly the administration that's going to create the committee and dictate what the national celebration of the 200th anniversary is going to be. Is it going to go in like the Kamala Harris, like Biden, left liberal Democratic Party celebration of the 250th anniversary, or will it be a Trump administration dictating this? And it's true that basically when Trump came into office, he had so much interest in basically wanting to craft the 250th anniversary narrative that would come from the highest parts of the federal administration. And so I just even glanced briefly, these things are always celebrated at both the federal, local, and state level. That's just how I feel like America's political system has always worked out. And so there's always like multiple like subcommittees and whatnot, but there is such a thing as like both an official narrative and then, how the people respond to it. But I looked at who is on that committee briefly. A lot of different senators, Republican and Democratic, from all over the country, but also Trump's own cabinet. In fact, like Pete Hegseth is on there, but it's like basically people from that cabinet appointed by Trump have to also be on it, as well as all three branches of government. And if that's like America 250th on the national level, there's obviously a PA, like Pennsylvania state level, and there's also a Philadelphia one, and they're all kind of vying for like all these contradictions of the crisis are hitting them at different levels. And I think it is something worth thinking about, but not in a sense that like all of this will come from the top. Of course, the people want to have their own, to make sense of this, their own history, to inherit this history in a way that actually feels reflective of who they are and what this country has been and what their struggles have been. And I feel that that's why what we're positioning ourselves to, also like free school, to actually, we've always talked about meeting or even like waging ideological struggle on the offensive and going toe to toe with the ruling elite. I feel that this is like one of those arenas that have to actually be taken up. And it isn't just one where we're going to hit back with like, the soft, basically of this pessimism that like all of it is bad. Like, I think that is how a lot of people do feel that this history is very heavy, or that even the federal or like, state, attempts at narrative hegemony just don't feel quite right. And so they'll, revert to the 1619 project. But how is it also possible that is also something being propped up by the ruling elite, to have people like, waste their energies on a dead end kind of struggle? That's one thing I was going to say. But the other thing I feel that actually was helpful that Jeremiah, you shared your article from the second issue of Avant-Garde on why we must inherit the third American Revolution, which is, that framing that we had developed a few years ago, as, we were talking about the first being 1776, the second being Civil War, but also including Reconstruction, the third being the Civil Rights Movement. And it dawns on me that like there have always been a lot of deep like reflection and also even bitterness or disappointment that from around anniversaries of American independence, but also that have crystallized into profound movements like when Frederick Douglass, that speech, what is the 4th of July to a slave? I think that's the name of that speech, or even like King, like writing the book, Why We Can't Wait, which is something I feel like I only paid more attention to after you wrote your article, which is why, which is how King opens with, why 1963? Why a Negro Revolution in 1963? Well, it's 100 years after emancipation, too early to talk about freedom. And it's like the same framing that like Baldwin starts with or like ends with his letter to his nephew, where he also says like emancipation in this time as his nephew is turning 14, 1963, is profoundly like, too early to celebrate freedom when there's so much unfreedom. And it like also reminds me that when they were trying to do all these 100-year anniversaries of the Civil War, like 1860 to 1960, that was also in the backdrop of the civil rights movement. So you couldn't really celebrate the Civil War without actually talking about the civil rights movement. And it's like, it's at the end of the day, both like somewhat, symbolic to have anniversaries or centennials or bicentennials, but it's actually also ideological, more so than just like, the symbology of 100 years, right?
Yes.
And I think the other thing that bringing up Mother Bethel, I realized when we had gone to Reverend Cavaness's most recent service at the earlier part of November or something like that, actually it reminds me that every time Mother Bethel, like because they're positioned in Philadelphia, as you're saying, this very strategic place, and that they like what Bishop Richard Allen, they have, operate at the same time as the founding fathers, in fact, also founding their own institutions, almost as a Black founding father. That's a very compelling narrative for Black folk, especially for Mother Bethel, and especially for this idea that I think Reverend Cavaness had put it as like, well, you have to take into account that like Black people were around the founding fathers the whole time, and they would watch as they, chartered documents and chartered institutions, and like they were not naive to be like, well, you know what, if they could do that, then we can found our own institutions, our own kind of, I guess we call it actually something different, which is also like we can found our own nation within a nation, our own civilization. But I also think there is something that also needs to come out of that too, which I think in Mother Bethel, I think has actually, every time there's been a 100th anniversary of the American signing of Declaration or the 150th anniversary, they've always tried to do something around it. So it's not surprising to me that it sounds like they're interested in this, but it also can't ignore the fact that actually to account for like Black folks' condition of unfreedom today, you actually do have to go back to Reconstruction, which is actually, if you start to take that in, you start to think about, Jim Crow, actually like the Great Migration. Actually, if you talked about the landscape of like, Black odds basically in Philadelphia, like Mother Bethel, I think will also have to, come back to this narrative. And I think this will maybe be a really interesting way to engage, like theologically, but also sociologically, ideologically, this larger study that we're conducting into not just theology, but especially what Black gods mean in, like the urban North after the Great Migration, and what kind of consciousness was crystallizing around encountering white supremacy in this new form that also had to be like, was birthed almost unnecessarily, but very necessarily to reinforce something that after the demise of slavery, a new kind of social system in the complexity of these northern cities. So I feel like that's one other thing that I feel that this anniversary maybe also opens us up to do.
Can I just say one thing?
Okay,
no, I don't want to cut you.
The last thing's very short.
This is the point at which both Burns and Beckert, when it gets to the feet of Reconstruction and the new social system, they can't figure it out.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But go ahead. I just wanted to make that point.
I was also gonna say, actually, this reminds me that like the city is also home to way too many museums who all seem to be talking about the same thing but differently around like where the Liberty Bell is and the Independence Hall. But I do know that the Museum of American Revolution, or the National Constitution Center, they have galleries and exhibits dedicated to the Civil War and dedicated to actually the Museum of American Revolution has an exhibition right now that's exploring the Declaration of Independence, the significance and legacies in both the abolition and civil rights movement. And I think they even have a bench from the letter from the Birmingham jail, on display, like artifacts, documents. But then also they've been very interested in wanting to showcase like how the words of the Declaration influenced Haitians, Vietnamese, like all these other anti-colonial struggles around the world. I'm saying like people find this very compelling, and institutions
But it is compelling, isn't it?
Yeah, they can't help but go in that direction, and they want that to be one of their major 250th 2026 exhibitions, to welcome visitors from maybe around the world. Who knows who's going to come to Philly upon this occasion? But at least visitors within the country of America itself too. I feel that might be. It's just like interesting to see how all of these institutes have to go to where it's compelling, because you can't ignore it. And the last thing I was going to say, I will close out with this, is that actually, as Alice, you were also talking about like the immigration of Chinese people to countries like America and Canada. One thing this reminds me in all the discourse about like America and 1776 and like all of this, it's like, anybody who's an immigrant coming here, perhaps if you're interested in citizenship and you have to study up on this history, you have to study up on like taking those stupid naturalization questions, or if you're just even an immigrant who may never take that test, but like consider this your home or consider this a big decision to come to this country, they're often talked about or positioned as like the best completers of these ideals. Like, you can find freedom or democracy in your country. Well, come find it here, because the founding fathers made it so like welcoming for you to do so. And in some ways it's like really, really, it's like really like I feel that like it's so easy to celebrate, an immigrant, like every time like these kind of documentaries or like narratives come up, they're like, and look at all the people around the world, all the different colors and shades are coming to this country to find those same ideals. It's so strange, right? Because I feel that actually it is Black folk that have actually had to contend with all of what this meant and what all of this didn't mean, and also had to struggle for it. And that actually, like, I think it is actually important that we have a different chronology and narrative, because I think it points to this hypocrisy when you want to lift up immigrants because it's so convenient as a completer to this kind of narrative of like, it is that it's so compatible with this idea that the American Revolution was perfect or perfected, and it's like now it's perfect for immigrants to quote unquote inherit or enter, versus when you can start with slavery, Reconstruction, Great Migration, and then even the counter-revolution against the civil rights movement. And then you see, like, actually that helps you see the Black proletariat as the central, engine, but actually agent of what makes all of these ideals so complex, but also actually possible to realize in a new kind of way that will actually once and for all like resolve these kinds of questions. So those are like some of the thoughts that came up in the last few.
Well, I was sad that I missed last week because I feel like this is really interesting, and I feel like I've had this question of like, what is the appropriate relationship between the three American revolutions? Because I feel like we have done a very deep study of the Third American Revolution. That's been years. I feel like for the last few years, we've also been very into Reconstruction in particular. And I feel like the formulation that actually African Americans as a people are more shaped or basically emerged from Reconstruction. And I think Reconstruction has been basically our pivot point for modernity or for a modern civilization. And so I feel like over the last few years, we were into the American Revolution for a time, but then I feel like we kind of set it aside a little bit, where I remember like reading this book. I was really into the Museum of the American Revolution, where I was like, oh, this is like really cool. And I thought like it was deep, that like Philadelphia is the place that like there's the Declaration of Independence, like what does it mean? And even when we saw RFK Jr. when he like had his rally at the fucking like lawn, and he was like, declare your independence. And I feel like we weren't like, you know, like so taken in by all of that. But like,
Yes.
there is a question of like, what does it actually mean? Like what is the relationship between them? Because I feel like ultimately the American people are presented with two overly simplistic ways to engage with the American Revolution. One is like kind of the Trumpist way of like pure patriotism.
Yeah.
Like it's okay that it was a white thing. Like we don't want to talk about its problematic aspects or like the contradictions, because if you're doing that, then you're basically like being heretical or not respecting the foundations of this nation, blah, 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 blah. And then I feel like the other one is like the 1619 Gerald Horne kind of like African cultural nationalist, like this country's on stolen land. I don't recognize this as a revolution.
Right.
This was actually counter-revolutionary, and there's no revolutionary quality to it. Whereas I feel like the way that I'm interested in approaching it and also actually making sense of this with the people is, if the American Revolution was a revolution, like what makes it revolutionary? Like what actually were those choices that human beings had to make? What were people actually fighting for? How was there like a unity that was accomplished? What were the ideas of it? But then also like, what does that actually mean? Like in the context of, I think, modernity and our understanding of modernity, or even this global capitalism thing, coming out of slavery, coming out of the African American, like the Black proletariat. Because I think something that you were saying too is that the Ken Burns documentary is kind of more focused on like the Native American question, and the Revolutionary War, I feel like, is kind of discussed as like America, Britain, like the colonists, and then Black people are kind of in there. But I feel like it's still sort of it's not really fully explored yet. Like what was that role of Black people, or what does it mean for the actual American revolutionary process, where Black folk are like the primary agent or the vanguard of revolution. And so I feel like that's one of the ways that I'm kind of connecting this like Sven Beckert history of like global capitalism, where Black people are like basically like still central to that, like overall development of capitalism, of America, and I think even of like revolution, where I feel like part of what we're saying is that revolution in some ways is a modern concept, and the American Revolution is one of like the first, because it comes with this idea of like genuine democracy, not just like feudalism, and basically like the people take up ideas, the people actually take up a struggle, and the people find some way towards like a more complete idea of freedom than was there before. But yeah, I think my question is, what actually is the relationship between like the first, second, and the third? Where I feel like it's easier for us to, I think, focus more on the second and the third, and I think that has given us a foundation to actually like engage in a meaningful way with the first one, which I think gives us an edge, because I feel like otherwise, like, there are a lot of exhibits. Like Penn already did one on like the coffee houses.
Oh yeah.
of the American
Revolution at Penn.
Because it's kind of trying to make it seem like, oh, like, how can we make revolution or the American Revolution like sort of a thing for people to engage with in like today's time, to make it not seem like an eternity away, like an ancient thing, but actually as like basically a modern or like human process. But I think, like how much of the sesquicentennial 250 anniversary stuff is basically like propaganda or operating in that mode of popular engagement, getting hits, just getting people to circulate, versus how much will actually have, I think, the ideological substance to like take the people forward and actually truly engage in like the democratic spirit of like the best of 1776.
Yeah, because I think what you were saying about three revolutions, because like, I don't know if other people who grew up in the Northeast felt this, but like, I can say as someone who, like, I only grew up with the 1776. Like, I'm literally because I'm from Boston, so even in my formal education, I don't know if it's the same everywhere in the US, but like, I was heavily only now as an adult do I realize how much I was heavily influenced in my consciousness, including consciousness of self, to be forced to have a relationship with the American Revolution, the first one. And it's because everything you were saying, I don't know if maybe everyone actually got this education, but like French Indian War, all that stuff is not new to me because it's so ingrained in my sense of where I come from. Like not China, but like America. Like I grew up with a sense of the first man who died in the American Revolution was Crispus Attucks, a black man. Like, I grew up with that. I grew up, I'm literally from the Battle of Lexington and Concord. That's where I literally went to high school. And I have a lot of bitterness towards people's, I do have a lot of bitterness towards 1776 because the way I was raised was with a sense of, we're inheriting 1776, when we would argue, no, we're inheriting a revolutionary tradition that last came on this earth with the Third American Revolution, which takes from the Second American Revolution, which takes from the First American Revolution. And I think what was clarifying was what Nuri was saying from what also you were presenting, Doc, of how much do you take seriously the American Revolution as part of humanity's, the history of consciousness, humanity's attempt at ideologically advancing certain ideas of democracy, God-given rights. How do you explain this era of man versus people, basically propaganda? I definitely grew up with, this is why I have a very contentious relationship with the sesquicentennial. I'm a little bit of a hater. I'm definitely, everyone knows I'm a hater, probably not you, Doc, because you don't really sense it from me, but I definitely have a lot of bitterness towards the American Revolution because all I grew up with was the sense of people saying, we have so much to be proud of as people who waged this revolution against the British, the Boston Tea Party, we threw that shit into the sea. And I'm like, y'all, treat me like shit. That's, as a child, you grew up with a sense of contradiction. That's genuinely how I grew up with. You're telling me I should be proud of this revolution, but I'm treated so inferior to you who see yourselves as descendants of these founding fathers who you actually genetically are not descendants of because you are immigrants from white Europe. Yet some of you claim to be from the Pilgrims and some of you also claim to be Cherokees because all white people claim they're part Cherokee.
Yeah, right.
And that's just a fact, for real. And I know you are.
A good part of black people.
Okay, yeah, well, I believe that more. I believe that part more. I mean, I've got double standards, so I'll be real about that. But yeah, I mean, that's some of my bitterness, I have to say. But I do agree that the significance of next year is, I mean, I was reading the National Security Report. This National Security Report that because Doc sent me that article of how Trump, basically people are really catching on to this whole thing where Trump said there is a civilizational erasure of Europe that we must save. But I mean, I actually looked at the real document. I actually looked at the actual document, which I actually found even more interesting than just the headlines from all these places. But it's the deep thing is that more than even the sesquicentennial I think is a flashpoint, a concrete anniversary that just kind of is just a date that we'll see how people deal with it. But it's clear that even the government itself, the Trump administration itself, I'm sure many different think tanks, ruling elites, they have a question of what is going to be the national identity? Not in terms of even just nationhood, but what is the future of this country? And because everywhere in the report is a reference to the Declaration of Independence, phrases from it, how do you make meaning of it? Okay, the Trump administration is making meaning of the Declaration of Independence by being that's why we have a right to protect our borders. We have blah, blah, blah.
Guns.
Yeah, guns, whatever. But then at the same time, there are many different, perhaps more real interpretations of how the Declaration of Independence has been taken up by people dedicated to a revolutionary future, not just on this land of Martin Luther King Jr. Yes, when you read the letter from a Birmingham jail, it is essentially his advancement of an interpretation of what do we mean by God-given law and God-given rights. God-given rights protected by the law and state. I mean, King proposes a different understanding of God-given rights. Like, okay, what do you define as God-given rights? I do believe in the God-given right of equality, but how it's been codified and how you see the manifestation of those God-given rights. King has advanced it on behalf of American people. Black folk have advanced it on behalf of the American people. But then you also have to contend with the fact that, like, I do agree with what Dr. Rephrase and things that I think it's something in free school we've built upon, which is the American Revolution has significance not just for America, but the American Revolution has significance for this axial age of humanity. Because the American Revolution maybe to like the Haitian Revolution to a certain extent, but definitely the Declaration of Independence you will find concrete examples of how the anti-colonial struggles took those set of ideas and tried to bring it toward this new modern era of sovereignty, liberation, freedom, like Ho Chi Minh of Vietnam references the Declaration of Independence, the Communist Party of China references the Declaration of Independence, and in fact, Sukarno, and in fact, Mao Zedong's personal hero was George Washington, which I always found really strange. Yeah, I mean, because he saw Washington as a revolutionary in a different set of conditions, addressing not so different modern questions of the state and the people. But I do think what you get from the National Security Report of the Trump administration is the problem is that they still think the way out is going to be a civilizational question of how close are we to Europe? There is that sense. They have in there, they're like our closest allies are Europe because we share a bond of civilizational unity with them. When in fact, my question is, I mean, if Ho Chi Minh, Sukarno, and the Chinese people, their states are all partially inspired by, based upon those revolutions, the constitution of the people, those struggles, the state itself constituted by these ideas is connected to the same ideas that constituted your state. Why would there not be a possibility of a new, closer civilizational bond of unity based upon that? And I mean, that's really a choice point of the future for the American people that I think Trump is not seeing. And I wanted to really make that point of, like, for us, the American Revolution we don't see it as a question of like patriotism defining us in this country. It is a question of the ideas for, and all humanity ideas for the resolution of real freedom, of a new era of new democracy. I did want to let that out though, that I have a personal contentious relationship with 1776 because a lot of that stuff, and like I don't know if like Smear's not here, but I guess he grew up in the Philly area school system. Like I don't know if it's different for you guys when you grew up in California and New York, and Texas is completely different. But like I definitely know for me, like it was like it was kind of a traumatizing.
Could you say a little bit more? I mean, I hear what you said. You said it was traumatizing because.
Well, because I mean,
all the white people who were celebrating it were also racist towards you.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But they're like, we're so good.
And you should be so grateful to us.
Yeah, I mean, in this era of a battle over citizenship, all these, the question of citizenship in this country. I mean, let's be real. Citizenship doesn't come from 1776. The citizenship comes from the struggle of Black folk. It comes from the anti-slavery struggle, defining citizenship, birthright citizenship, all of that. And I mean, these are all, I mean, existential, political, and ultimately will have to also be moral questions.
I wanted to add to what Emily was saying, because I think when in your remarks, that is also what I was thinking about, how you said that this is not primarily about the history or knowing the history, but it is really a question of what is America going to be in the future. And I feel like this 250 years the celebration of the 250th anniversary is going to be an opportunity for all sides of the ideological landscape to provide a narrative about what America's place in the world is. Because that is a question which, after being sort of stable and settled for a very long time, today is completely unstable. That's because of Trump. And the thing that, Emily, I also looked at the National, because the New York Times is really reporting on it. And I found it funny that they put it this way, that gone is the long familiar picture of the United States as a global force for freedom, replaced by a country that is focused on reducing migration while avoiding passing judgment on authoritarians. So this is
That's a New York Times.
yeah, that's New York Times.
What is that, an editorial?
It's a New York Times art
Commentary
on the national strategy report, which I think came out a few.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and so basically they're saying Trump is changing the whole character of what America represents to the world. It is no longer a force for freedom in the world. But I feel like these are important questions because some new consensus or consolidation is being arrived at. I mean, like Trump, it's what Emily was saying, I agree completely. His thing about Europe is basically facing civilizational erasure and so on. Even if you don't agree with that, it is true that something is being worked out, something is not stable anymore. And I think about the American Revolution, what Emily was bringing up, all these other anti-colonial struggles, looking to the American Revolution for something substantive. If anything, it is that needs to be unearthed and used to remake the American people for the future. Because it reminded me a lot about Baldwin and what he says. I talk about this a lot because I think I haven't fully understood the significance of why Baldwin makes those comparisons between America and Europe, where in thinking about the American Revolution, I feel like that was also an opportunity to make a civilizational break from Europe. And I mean, at least the possibility existed there. And in a lot of...
How do you know the civilizational break hasn't been?
Well, I mean,
But not acknowledged, but it's been...
Well, maybe it was made, but then with the invention of personal whiteness and the codification of the white supremacist social system, they weren't able to fully break from white civilization or European civilization that way. And I feel like a lot of what Trump is also saying about the erasure of European civilization and so on is part of that contradiction where, I mean, what is it to Trump? What European civilization? I don't fully understand that. And in general, I feel like there were possibilities that the American Revolution represented that I guess, were abandoned somewhere down the line. And that's why you needed the second and the third and a fourth revolution and so on and so forth. But right now also, because there is so much uncertainty to what America's relationship to Europe is going to be, those are the terms in which I think it makes sense for us to revisit the history of the American Revolution and really look at what it represented, what was the promise of it, how much of it was actually achieved, and how much of it is still left to be, Because even when people talk about the unfinished revolution, they're talking about something that's unfinished that is not what free school is talking about. But anyway.
Even when they talk about democracy. That's why we have to say peace and revolutionary democracy and new democracy. You have to, there's no way in the world you could talk about a future without defining democracy. Because the seizure of power of the state is for the sake of democracy.
Interesting.
But I'm sorry.
Yeah, and the last point I wanted to put in there is, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, and this is sort of related to what Nuri, you were saying about the relationship between the three revolutions. But more directly, I want to know Black people's relationship to the American Revolution.
And to the celebration.
To the celebration.
And it's going to be very interesting, I can tell you.
Because I assume that a lot of people are skeptical, like Emily.
Absolutely. Especially this flag waving and drum beating. Black people don't want to hear that.
Playing.
Fife. You don't know how that turns Black people off, even the most ordinary Black person.
They're going to try really hard to get Black people to be part of it. They're going to spend a lot of money to do it.
They still have people that can play fifes.
Oh, yeah.
They might have to go, just go to some tenor saxophone player.
Going back to
Go ahead. Oh, no, go.
Well, yeah, a lot of a lot of
We're gonna be
has been
reenactors.
said, but like I was thinking of like last free school. I think towards the end, you were talking about in our discussion of why we are reading, why we are even talking about this book by Sven Beckert. You put it like this, that we're also trying to figure out the moral preconditions for the future. And I think today's discussion is making me think that like what were the preconditions of the first American Revolution, and the way you were connecting it to what comes out of Europe, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, as in some ways being the moral preconditions for this break that the revolution represented at that time. And but also at the same time the Industrial Revolution being it's like you were saying, it's almost inseparable from the American Revolution.
Absolutely.
And a new like really a break in the I guess we can say a break in the history of consciousness, because it changed all kinds of relationships, not just in America, but it opened up these possibilities for the world. And I was thinking that for instance, even Du Bois talks about like Jefferson as Jefferson sort of admits that that in the history of this nation the American Negro has never been studied, and this means that any general conclusion that you can make is going to be hazardous. That's how Du Bois quotes Jefferson. But what he was saying was really moving, that the way to look at this history is not to ask how perfect it was or not, but to see that it was this recognition of the contradiction between freedom and slavery. It was an important recognition, and it was up to history to solve these contradictions. And but the thing is, and I guess everybody has been saying it, but what comes out as this possibility of a break with the first American Revolution, it no longer, I think, with the next 100 years and the defeat of Reconstruction, which we've been studying, that's what changes history forever, because you no longer have a way of identifying what the first American Revolution meant, because that was, as I was saying, the creation of whiteness, which meant that you identify the first American Revolution almost as a continuity of Europe, when it is obvious to the rest of the world, which was, everybody who was the whole anti-colonial movement looking to the first American Revolution, they're also obviously looking at it as a break from Europe.
Right.
And I think this is why looking at the American Revolution after Du Bois, after the defeat of Reconstruction, but also after Du Bois, it means completely different things. Where now we can talk about actually what were the achievements of what were the possibilities, the breakthroughs in the first American Revolution, and Reconstruction and its defeat as overturning it and basically making the first American Revolution equivalent to a continuity from Europe. And so therefore the only way you can look at it is what Nuri was saying, as either a blind patriotism in which is indistinguishable from whiteness, really, or complete rejection and pessimism, and hence no future. But I think this makes it very clear that the role of free school is indispensable to actually say that we are at a time where even the fact that the American Revolution is it's so much in people's minds, and in whatever way, we are either reacting to it or we're trying to figure out the terms on which to engage with it. It makes me think that we are really living in a time where the American people are. There's something very dynamic and alive. It's a civilization which is figuring out who we are, and I think it's very unique. It's unique in the world. That's what I want to say.
I'll just add one thing, to the whole Europe thing. We've also talked about how European immigrants had an automatic place in the growing industrial democracy, and were used to not give the black proletariat. But that's also there in the mix in rethinking some of this. Why that break wasn't possible with Europe.
And I just say this, Emily, and I know it's for me too. The only way to find, quote, peace with the American Revolution is through the interpretation of Du Bois
Yes, that's
and this long history.
And even Robeson.
And Robeson,
Yeah.
all of that, yeah. Otherwise, we may as well just march down the street as
Activists.
American Revolution imposters or,
My mom made me do that growing up.
well,
I was a fife player.
hey, wait a minute, that's not, I gave a speech at 14 at
Yeah,
Independence Hall.
my flag.
Why, my flag, my flag. You should have heard me. I was a bootlicker.
I was a bootlicker.
My flag,
How
my
old
flag.
were you?
Was about 13 or 14.
You should have
Now I
known that.
love my flag. I do my flag, my flag. They took me all around the city to give that speech. My flag, my flag. Can you imagine? So and you were a fife player.
Yeah, something like,
Okay.
a recorder. They
Okay.
called it a recorder.
Oh, yeah.
It was the
Recorder,
plastic
yeah.
recorder.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they forced us to dress up.
Well, yeah, because I feel like part of my either hesitation or skepticism towards 1776 is because of not necessarily a childhood experience, but more because of the No Kings protests a few months ago, where the iconography of 1776 was used as a defense of whatever you want to call it, liberalism, liberal democracy, this vision of America that, if it ever even existed, which is dubious, that itself has already died. And I think in general, it's a worthwhile question for us in terms of political practice of if we're engaged in this thing called ideological struggle, the battle of ideas, and we're concerned with going on the offensive in that sense. Part of it, I think, one of the lessons that I've drawn is you have to choose the battles where you fight deliberately and not just have the battleground chosen for you, if that makes sense. Like when we, for instance, when we did the Year of Baldwin, it wasn't just that we knew people were going to be talking about Baldwin, but it's because we knew and know that Baldwin matters for the American people regardless. Baldwin matters for humanity regardless of all of the propaganda. And then you have to engage with, the ideological landscape. And so part of like what I've grappled with is like, does 1776 on its own terms matter to the American people? Does it matter to humanity? And so I think, the discussion has been very useful in that sense of like, okay, well, how do you find your way towards it? And I guess I wanted to, on the topic of, like the Third American Revolution, the reason why, like through Free School and like Avant-Garde, I'd like reshared the Avant-Garde article that I wrote was because of, actually Jahan had told me, mentioned that the anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott was yesterday, when it first initially began in 1955. And I think it raises a lot of questions actually which are relevant to the Beckert book in particular, around time, I think, and then these questions of like law and chance that we've always been interested in, which are, even if you were to look at it from the perspective of Montgomery, Alabama, 1955, no one, not even King, could have predicted where the movement would go, right? Like that is part of, in some ways, one of the paradoxes almost of like revolutions as a phenomena in human history, which is that simultaneously they are an assertion of consciousness. They are this kind of leap forward in consciousness. And it's almost like there is a logic to them, which we are interested in because that's literally like the kind of science that we're engaged in. There is a logic to it, and yet so much of what unfolds is contingent. It is chance, because it's this unleashing of human agency. And so whether it's 1776 or the Third American Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, part of what happens is like it becomes something that no one could have predicted at the very beginning. And I think that that's a really important, I know, something I'm just really interested in general. And I think the way that I connected to Beckert, which actually I'm interested in now, I guess hopefully to read or listen to the book at some point. But it's like,
talking about this one?
yeah, that one, which is,
I think reading might be better.
how do you, actually, because
you
it,
can
like,
underline, you can do your underline.
because like the whole French thing of like the longue durée, the long duration, actually reminded me of recently, Nuri, or a few months ago, Nuri and I went to the Smithsonian of Museum of Natural History, which is the main science museum in DC. And something that I remember actually a lot, it's a fine museum, but like in like the kind of prehistoric parts of the museum, they really try to impress upon you this concept of deep time, which is basically like all of those like almost like millions, hundreds of millions of years in the development of the earth, which then it's like all this stuff, which it's like literally almost incomprehensible for the human brain to conceive of, because the pace and the scope of time is so long. And then all of a sudden it accelerates, and then you have these periods of, at least in biological evolution, like these periods of punctuated equilibrium, you have these periods of like the Cambrian explosion, all that stuff. And I think it's dubious, I think, to draw a direct parallel between biological time and then social time. And yet there are still some commonalities, which are basically like, how do you relate that, whether it's deep time or long human time, how do you relate that to periods of evolution? And like with Beckert, actually, I'm part of what I'm interested in is how do you, if he's established a long 1,000-year global history, he's still interested in the capitalist revolution, which is a concentrated period of time in which the pace of historical development, the pace of social time accelerates. And so I think that's part of what I'm interested in is like, there's, I don't know, just this question of like revolution, time. Time is not something which is objective, but social time, historical time.
Time
tiering, which I don't understand. We've talked about because like the other thing that's very striking about like for instance, the Why We Can't Wait book, which is King in the middle of the Third American Revolution doing an assessment of what kind of revolution is this? Why is it happening? All of that. He's like, it is Black people's consciousness of time which is propelling this revolution. It is a consciousness of a century since emancipation. And in a sense, the slowness of social time, I don't know if I'm explaining this the right way, but it's like he's like Black people saying time hasn't moved fast enough, so we have to take time into our own hands and accelerate time.
That's right.
Like all of that, it's like that. It's really baked into King's understanding of the logic of of the Third American Revolution and the kind of the revolutionary process that was unfolding. I just wanted to bring up this question.
I think we should hold on to that theory of time, a concept of time, because it's all over King. Why We Can't Wait. Procrastination is still the thief of time. All of this, the fear. So he is time conscious. Oh yeah.
I actually wanted to start a little bit by talking about the national security strategy that came out. This conversation, I'd forgotten about it, but then this conversation reminded me about a couple of things, which is, we've talked about his strategy towards Europe. We've talked about his strategy, his vision for America. But I was also really interested in how the security strategy says that what America's national security strategy will be towards the Middle East and Asia, because as part of that document, they say that, well, the Middle East should be allowed to grow and develop at its own pace. America should not interfere in, the Middle East or Asia. Should allow them to decide their own policy, should allow them to decide their own reforms. And no matter how much time it takes, we have to give it to them so that they can. So non-interference almost in these affairs, which has not been typically America's strategy. It has always been we have to promote democracy and freedom in all of these countries, which is like double speak for coups and color revolutions. But I think that this is a very different approach to both Europe as well as to the rest of Asia and the Middle East that they're trying to go for.
Exception is Latin America.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Latin America.
Because people are arguing that it's a return to the Monroe Doctrine.
Yeah,
Right.
the Venezuela.
Sorry.
No, the Venezuela is kind of insane at this point. But what was kind of missing, which I thought was there was no real talk about cooperation with, the Middle East and Asia. It's almost like they're trying to limit their civilization instead of saying that we have to broaden it. We have to, like what you were saying about, intercivilizational unity. That is something that is not part of their vision. At least from what I read of the strategy, I didn't feel that way. I think I wanted to also talk a little bit about the first American Revolution, how I felt about it. I don't really know a lot about it, and I'm hoping that when we watch this Ken Burns documentary, I get to learn a little bit about it. But mostly, my view of the revolution of 1776 has been, in my mind, formed by the contradictions that were inherently present in it. That you are a group of people who are struggling for freedom, saying that all men are created equal, however, there is slavery, right? And so those contradictions more or less made up my view of 1776 in my head. But this discussion and whatever we've been talking over the week, it makes me think, if I say that the central contradiction in the first American Revolution is slavery, the second American Revolution was fought to counter that. And then, the movement in time was along the basis of what about Black people and slavery. The second American Revolution was fought because of slavery. And then the third American Revolution was fought because, emancipation did not exactly grant them the rights, the equal rights that were promised to them during emancipation in 1857. And so I think the trajectory of American revolutions, in my head, the way that I think about it, has been centrally around Black people, right? And
you can make that argument. That's the Du Bois argument.
Right. And King, when after the civil rights movement, after the amendment to the Constitution, where Black people could vote, not just Black people, a lot of immigrants got a lot of rights during the civil rights movement. He writes this book, Where Do We Go From Here? And I've been recently reading it. And one of the things that really struck out to me with respect to this conversation is that, we are constantly in a state of struggle, and revolution. And what emancipation gave us was the freedom from slavery. And then now we have the right to vote. But bless you. But the absence of cruelty does not mean the presence of justice, and that's why we have to fight for. That's why we went into the Poor People's Campaign and spoke up against war, which was affecting everybody in the country. And so, I think that King was in this thing that you mentioned, and I was really thinking about it while you were talking. This feedback loop, that once you get into the struggle, into the revolutionary struggle, things happen that take you into different directions that enforce your idea and consciousness towards more struggle. And
Absolutely.
And this kind of
Can
happened.
I just say, you are literally shaped by the battleground on which you're fighting.
Right.
It shapes you as well as you shaping it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. King kind of entered the struggle in order to get, voting rights, and then, that fundamentally changed him. The people shaped him, and then he was like, okay, I have to go and fight for something else. I have to fight for actual equality. Now we have got voting rights, but we need equality, and this is not it. And all of this, as you say, you've been saying this a lot, that Black people have never forgotten the defeat of Reconstruction, right?
No.
And I think I've been trying to understand all of this with that lens.
We have never accepted the
We have not
defeat of
accepted
Never.
the defeat of Reconstruction.
even up to this very day.
And I'm kind of thinking if the defeat of defeat of Reconstruction was in a way a defeat of the principles of the first American Revolution
Well, of
as
course.
well. Yeah.
There's no question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No. See, and this becomes a part of our intervention into the whole discussion. That it was never complete, that the main force attempting to complete it were Black people, and even up to this day. I think we can make that case. And I think the way Jerry puts it in his essay, I think by even organizing it around the concept of the Black proletariat, just the introduction of that concept kind of changed. It's a paradigm shift in itself,
Yeah.
It changes the way you even talk or think about this.
Yeah, I think that because Reconstruction was defeated, we cannot look at the Revolution of 1776 as this perfect,
No.
thing that happened. Because I think by overturning Reconstruction, you overturn the last two revolutions as well, and the foundations that it was based on.
And Trump, because he talks so much, is going to shoot himself in the face. Just like he's saying that Europe faces civilization erasure. Oh, you're saying that, well, European civilization is white.
Yeah.
Is that all we're talking about? Nothing.
Right.
Yeah, that's so.
Yeah. No, that's last thing I just wanted to mention that there was this article that I was reading in the Philadelphia Inquirer about 3-4 days ago, and it was I thought it was interesting because it was titled "Pen is not on stolen land."
So Pen is not on.
Pen is not on stolen land.
It wasn't in the
It was in the DP. Okay, I kind of mixed those up. I'm sorry. It was in the DP. It was not in the Inquirer. And that one. And I think the main argument that this person is trying to make is that you can't really assign, all these land grant universities are trying to make land acknowledgements nowadays. Everybody's saying that, we are on the stolen land of the Lenape-Hawking and all of that. And so, but I think the main thing that I got from what this guy was saying is that we cannot really say that America is immoral because of its past and what happened in the 1600s and the 1700s, and that we have to kind of find a way to move forward.
Yeah. And this is very important. And this, Cornell West is an exemplar that moral discussion is always in order when you talk about American history. You can't discuss it without deploying moral questions of why this and why this choice was made. And so I would agree that part, the moral imperative, moral discussion.
Yeah, because I feel like
Oh, no, you should finish.
just that, during the days of like chattel slavery, it's like there were people who recognized slavery as wrong, as immoral, and it's very well documented. And that's part of what, like, whether it's Du Bois or Baldwin, that's part of the crux of whiteness, which is that you know that what you're doing is wrong, and you still do it.
See, could I just say small? See, and it's people like Tom Paine, John Brown, Viola Liuzzo, and James Reed. These are exemplars for white folk. If you don't have any, it's not Tucker Carlson. You know he's going. You know Tucker Carlson going to mess up too. He had no way. But it is these really heroic, self-sacrificing figures that we have to include in our.
And the one thing I wanted to add related to what Shantanu was saying was that I guess another way of thinking about this like larger question of like law and chance and revolution is like both intended and unintended consequences, which are, you could say this 1776 triggered huge unintended consequences. One of which was whether or not the founding fathers specifically wanted to put it on the table or whether they wanted to avoid the question, like all that aside, it's objectively true that whether it's like Absalom Jones, Richard Allen, like I didn't realize that, like, because Richard Allen was born like 1760, I think, so he was a young man coming up during the American Revolution. So it's like whether or not white people wanted to make it just a white thing, Black people heard, like they're in the midst of all this, and it's part of what creates the condition for Black people to then take up all of these lofty ideals, which are not met, obviously, but then that part of it becomes part of the precondition for even something like the anti-slavery struggle, which is then part of the Second American Revolution.
And it's not insignificant that they were Methodists. The Methodism and anti-slavery or abolition, and it's no mistake that the African Methodist Episcopal.
Because not to bring up another Smithsonian, but the other one that I remember from going to DC was the African American History and Culture Museum, MEMAC, which I remember when it first opened, like around a decade ago.
It was when we were in.
So Emily and Alice and I were all doing our little internships in Washington DC during college. And I remember it was like a big deal when that museum opened because it's like right on the mall. And I remember being like really impressed by it when I first went, because it's like, I don't know if other people have been, but it's like the way that it's structured, it's tiered. So it's like you start in the basement, you start where it's dark, you start with basically the creation of the transatlantic slave trade, and then
DC.
National Museum of African American History and Culture at DC. And honestly, like even going back to it, I really like the first floor. The first, like the starting floor, because actually you can tell that it's very editorial in terms of who curated which parts of the museum.
It's true.
And the further you go up to the closer to the present, the worse the museum gets.
Yes.
Ideologically, but it's like, it's like, it is really clear that like there's all these Black people who are, first of all, they play different roles during the American Revolution, all that stuff, but like, it's like, it really does impress upon you, like Black people were conscious of what was happening with this whole process, and like, especially afterwards, we're taking it into their own hands ideologically. Okay, this nation has been created, like, are we serious about this question of freedom and democracy? And like, that's what I really liked. But then like, the closer it gets, like, civil rights movement was not very good, but I guess I want to make the point that's just like, like, even during the Civil War itself, like Du Bois makes that point, that the emancipation of the slaves itself was an unintended consequence. Lincoln didn't want to free the slaves initially. And it was, in fact, Du Bois is saying that it was the Black proletariat who forced the hand of the federal government, of the Union Army, to then basically declare the Emancipation Proclamation and to invite the freed slaves, or the slaves who freed themselves, into the Union Army, who then basically decide the weight of the war itself. But yeah, you could even say like Trump has unleashed a lot of unintended consequences, which he cannot control anymore, and he never would have been able to control it. But like those those consequences are still being borne out in terms of what they will be and how the people will take it up. But that's the big question.
My dad asked the funniest question during Thanksgiving because we went on a Civil War. We visited a plantation, and I mean, it's not that rare because every place there are so many. There are like thousands and thousands. But my dad asked me, we like looked at a house and like because basically a Civil War battle was fought there, and my dad was like, "So I'm confused. Why you just told me that like all these Confederate soldiers like were dying and they didn't have any food and stuff, but like didn't they have all these slaves? So like why weren't the slaves fighting in the Southern Army?" And then you could tell all the like white people were like, yeah. And then I was like, she kind of gave a certain answer, which wasn't honestly, in my opinion, that great. But I told my dad, I was like, no, it's because they didn't see Black people. They did not want to admit that Black folk were people, which is why they were not allowed to, not that they would want to offend them, but they were not ever like told to fight in the army because that would be accepting that Black people are equal to white people.
The
They're
prospect
both
of
men.
arming
And if you arm them,
Yeah.
who would they point their weapons at? Yeah. See, yeah, but
Yeah. So, but
could I just ask, this is so interesting how your parents look at all of this. Because, I was talking to you the other day, whenever, and one of the things that I think about your parents are they are still making sense of the Chinese Revolution and the Cultural Revolution. I guess all of your parents are, and so how do you make sense of another revolution, which is in a lot of ways obscured by a lot of propaganda? I'm interested in how you perceive their intellectual process.
well, what's interesting is my mom, I think my parents take history way more seriously than me, for example. Like that's very obvious. They think that the only way, I think an assumption they have is the only way to know a place is to know the historical struggles, because they make a deliberate effort, like, because we grew up in the suburbs of Boston, so like my parents were very much like, oh, like let's look at the American Revolutionary sites, and I always thought it was so lame. I was like, why are you dragging me to all these reenactments? Why are you bringing me to all these places? Like, I was never appreciated that. Felt very resentful of it. What does it say about me? But for my parents, they love history, and like now they're really into the Civil War. Like that's their big thing, is they're really interested in the Civil War. Like it was a huge feat of, I think, free school that like my parents were like, oh yeah, like Abraham Lincoln only did the Emancipation Proclamation because Black people like changed the tide of the war, so that's why Abraham Lincoln was forced to. Yeah, like anyways, it's so interesting seeing my parents absorb the Civil War, because like my parents went to Gettysburg. They like don't fly in the U.S. They drive, like no matter how far it is, because they spent their whole time going to different Civil War sites. Like they're obsessed with Gettysburg. Like when I was a child, my dad forced me to recite the Gettysburg Address and to get a popsicle. Like, yeah, he was like 7 years ago, blah, 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 Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg speech. And like, yeah, and then also like when my dad was like, how I see free school? I see free school like a study group. Like you guys are like Mao Zedong's study group before the revolution, when there was only 12 of them, and they were like, blah, blah. So it is interesting, because I do think there's very common understandings of what Nuri was saying is like, what defines a revolution? You need, first of all, it's an ideological struggle as much as it would hypothetically become a violent or non-violent struggle. Like besides just strategy and forms, you need ideas, you need a vision, you need to explain the forces, the dynamics of history. So I do think, it is kind of interesting. I don't completely understand how my parents
Makes all the
make
sense in
of
the world to
certain
me. The Chinese and Indian revolutions are so very present. It's not that long ago. So when they come here from India and they say, oh, now I understand Gandhi. You know what I'm saying? That's in a certain way saying we share the same revolutionary moment. Or, you take your parents and the Chinese Revolution and the Cultural Revolution, where your mother said that it looks like the United States is in a pre-revolutionary situation. I appropriated that from her. Yeah.
No, I think you came up with it.
Did I?
Yeah, and then I asked my mom, she was like, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Or it's from New York Times, I forget.
No, I thought I got it from your mother, but maybe, okay. Anyway, we had a feedback loop going on. But I think we're all dealing with we're all dealing, by the way, you're not that far removed. We're not that far removed from each other because we share the same time, the same revolutionary time.
Yeah.
So it's easy, we had the Gandhi thing and Howard Thurman, and I learned all of this from Bartow about Howard Thurman. Because they're reading Howard Thurman to make sense of Gandhi and the Indian, which they couldn't make sense of in India. But here they could. And I think similarly, I think your parents, I could be wrong, are still dealing with the Chinese Revolution, quote, what went wrong, why did Mao take this turn, and all of that. And here, by understanding the American revolutionary process, it could help them. And then, of course, you all, unbeknownst to yourselves, are inheriting the questions they are asking. I think so. And I think your father sees Lincoln in a similar way that one could even see Mao Zedong at the best time. Oh, so sorry.
No, that's okay. I kind of wanted to build on something that Jeremiah had said, because I've been thinking something similar when you had said, like, making sense of the 250th. Is it something that stands in and of itself, or what are we looking at it in relationship to? And I thought this conversation was really exciting for me or clarifying, because I think we made a lot of headway in defining why this will be a central grounds of political and ideological struggle for 2026. And so I guess, like, back to your earlier remarks, and then some people had made this point as well. It made me think about something you had said a while ago about the idea of the prequel. And so
The
idea of the prequel.
The idea of the people.
Prequel, not a sequel.
Prequel.
So an event that comes afterward, but explains something that came before. And I think when we're talking about, we mentioned Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement, and then we mentioned the Chinese Revolution, Sukarno, Ho Chi Minh, and all of these references in the modern global anti-colonial struggles back to the American Revolution. Because I don't have it's like difficult for me to say it, but I feel that trend or that development in world consciousness, in striving toward world democracy, shows that in looking back to the American Revolution, they were looking for the Black proletariat. And in 2026, I think the assertion or the struggle still is to place the consciousness of the Black proletariat where it belongs to the world. Because, like, okay, you've been talking about, let's say, like, let me put it a different way. I also think the American Revolution, or 1776, is going to be important because it's another access point in which we can make new sociological discoveries in terms of the consciousness of the American people. Because I think white people and immigrants had less of a relationship consciously to the second and third revolution, as maybe they often do the first.
Right.
And I'll also use my dad as an example. I know when he was in Taiwan in the 1970s, his image of America was shaped by democracy in the sense of 1776, and it's not a bad thing. And it was maybe made concrete through, for example, the music he was listening to, which was both black and white, but really it was black in essence. And I don't know how well I'm saying it, but I'm saying that I still think the way that people are searching for the definition of freedom or democracy in the modern period, we see evidence of that. But really, I would contend that a lot of what people are searching for is the definition of freedom and democracy as constituted by darker humanity, or as it becomes advanced by darker humanity through the centuries succeeding 1776. But I think like also, Emily, you had asked that, like you had talked about your background, and then you had asked like if it was different for other people. I did not have a relationship like to the first American Revolution, but I think I grew up in a very different place where there is a very weak sense of history, and I don't think that a very weak sense of history.
Yes,
so
that's California.
yeah, but I think the suburb where I was living, I think like some of our schools weren't even incorporated until the 1990s.
Wow.
So it was very, very young. I think like even including our elementary school was like very recent. But I say that because like the reason I also find this exciting is it takes me back to why I was attracted to Philadelphia as a city when I chose to move here like 10 years ago. And I loved some of like what you were bringing up in your remarks about the need for a development of science that describes this crisis, and a sociology that involves complex systems, different actors with different consciousness contending with different but connected social problems. And then you also talked about obviously like structuring structures and the role of ideology in that. And the reason I was like very struck by Philadelphia as a city was because I felt that you had all of that, which is to say that, I mean, I think you were also making the crowns for Philadelphia as a city that can make, or our relationship in the city can make a great leap in sociology and knowledge that can be such a contribution to the future of this nation and the world. And I think it's not just going to be people within this nation looking to Philadelphia for the meaning of revolution and democracy in the modern period, but also the world itself, which still knows the American Revolution. And like another thing I wanted to ask, and maybe this is obvious, is like if we're defining the most recent axial age as the period of modernity as constituted by the Enlightenment, the Protestant Reformation, the rise of Europe and European industry, like my question is, would we say that then the American state is the first modern state, basically?
I think so.
Because I think that's important.
Good, I'm sorry, forgive me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the most.
I think that's a hugely important question.
Yeah. I think that it'll give us a way to understand more about what are the ideological stories. It's like why does poverty persist when we have governance, or when we have young professionals in the city? We also have education, and I just think that based on a lot of how we're talking about the way we want to study the first revolution will help us advance like a lot of these questions.
Wait, I just wanted to add a little bit to that. I don't have the language yet, which is why I didn't want to talk about it.
It's hard.
It's because I think the way you connected, so it is the American Revolution, but it's also the American Revolution in conjunction with this axial shift and the rise of the industrial, the industrial revolution. To not connect them is to treat maybe the American Revolution purely as a question of history, about national pride, national identity, or struggle for national liberation. But then if you see that it wasn't just that, but then it also created the conditions for a whole different kind of economic order that did not stay limited to the Western Hemisphere, that became the over-determining economic order or the basis of ideological economics relationships for the whole world.
Yes.
I think, and that is the question related that I couldn't formulate, is what is the connection of that?
Well, can I just suggest something? And I don't want to see. We're talking about initial conditions. You see, this is big. Initial conditions. Was the American Revolution an initial condition, let's say, for Indian independence? Must there have been a zeitgeist, a spirit of the time, which made Gandhi possible, whom I think we have to study as a genius, you know? But yes, so you can say, I mean, there are already many he says that the initial conditions for the rise of capitalism as a system, was the trading system that goes back 1,000 years. So now, in determining initial conditions, it is a subjective determination by the researcher. And sometimes you have to change what you see as initial condition. In other words, what were the conditions without which there could not have been an American Revolution? It was not a historical inevitability. It was a historic necessity. You know what I'm saying? However, insufficient to fulfill humanity's aspirations which themselves were launched by the American Revolution, or we could say this period of the Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, and so on. I mean, these ideas may have existed everywhere in the world, including India, but they did not take this concrete form of a movement until the independence movement. I would say the same for China. It took, and we can't, and when we talk about China, we have to talk about Sun Yat-sen. We cannot begin with 1921, the formation of the Chinese Communist Party of China. We have to start with Sun Yat-sen, what, 1911, 1912, whatever. And, you know, what were the conditions that produced him? By the way, if anybody has a good biography of Sun Yat-sen, I'd like to read it, because I want to know what was going on in his head, because, you know, he was in Japan,
Hawaii.
And Hawaii, yes.
Well, I wanted to say, like,
I cut you up. But
No, I didn't know how to finish that. So.
Can I ask you a question? Does that make sense? Kind of
Yeah, it does, because I think I'm also thinking about, like, there are many aspects to the American Revolution. There's the anti-colonial aspect of it, but then there's also complications created by the presence of slavery on these shores. Then there's also this increasing entrenchment in this global economic order and so on. And each of these things can be studied separately, but then together they create conditions for something to emerge that is difficult to fully scientifically study or understand without seeing it in conjunction with each other and in historical terms and sociological terms. Yeah, I feel like that kind of a study, I mean, this is still going to be, I think this is, you know, a contribution to that. But then again, it doesn't do it in its totality, like you were saying. Like, I think he wants to say, and I haven't read it, so I'm only going to, like, this is my, from listening to his interviews, my understanding is that he wants to say, I'm making a break from Marxism. And to some extent, he obviously does, but he doesn't have he's also then at the same time trying to default to something else which doesn't exist anymore. And then you don't take Du Bois seriously. So you're in a trap.
He does take Du Bois seriously, but he don't want to mention him.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Well, something that Beckett also says that we had mentioned last free school is that he said that capitalism was also required the development of the state.
That's right.
And so I think that's relevant because it goes back also to Michelle's question of the like what constitutes the modern state?
Yeah.
And did that form with the first American Revolution as not just as the beginning, but as a concretization of the Enlightenment, Renaissance, so forth. But as like people were talking, I was just pulling up the Declaration of Independence, and it's interesting because if you don't mind, I'm going to read through this because I remember actually memorizing it too when I was a younger child, and I do think these ideals resonate with young children in terms of its morality, in terms of its courage, but then you get jaded because you see that it doesn't actually, the actual conditions don't match up to these ideals. And then you take these paths of either like these ideals you give up responsibility towards it. And you also aren't taught it in a way where these ideals can be, I don't know if they can be fully achieved, but you can struggle towards perfection. So he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused as assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. And I guess as I was reading it, it's, we talked about the contradictions of 1776 and those that were being worked out, but also, like with the Second American Revolution, the third, especially with King, to say it's not that I'm anti-patriotic in opposing the war in Vietnam, but actually it is part of my patriotism to actually stand up against my government that has not lived up to this contract. And I guess, I think because sometimes I think it's easy to take these words for granted, like now living, following the formation of a modern state. But what was the context of that time and necessary to create a state when at a time, or to reimagine what the colonies were? Because like you were saying before, they thought of themselves as British. So what was that break or revolution from thinking and imagining themselves as British to imagining themselves as American? Or I think even from what we're saying is that what did American mean or has meant in the past century or two. And now actually, is it necessary actually to reconceptualize American as not white, but actually as Black? Like, what are the new values and concrete strivings that make that a reality?
Yes.
Yeah.
By the way, there's a book out on that sentence, "We declare these truths." Somebody could look it up, I forget who, just on that. And they claim that this is the most important sentence in human history. You know, but what was your question again?
I don't know if I have a
White
question.
and black.
Huh?
White or black.
Oh, is the nation white or black? And here we're talking civilization.
Yeah, because I think essentially what I'm saying is, how do
Oh, the
people,
state, I was going to talk about the state.
well, both,
But no,
which
you go
is like,
ahead.
how do people that once imagined themselves as British, what does it mean to be British? And now what does it mean to be American in the sense that they were saying at that time?
And what does it mean then, as Du Bois said, in the context of all of this, to discover personal whiteness? I mean, we have to work all of this out at a certain point. But this is why the concept of democracy is so important, because it is a concept not of personal freedom, but of the state's relationship to the people and to individuals. So we are talking about the question that you were concerned with in China, but also here, because the formation of the US state and the formation of the Chinese state and the formation of the Indian state were based upon similar processes and similar worldviews. We declare these, and that a government must represent the people. That was here, though not fully real, of course, but certainly Sun Yat-sen and those said no. And I'm certain Gandhi, if we delve more deeply into his thinking and politics, I think those ideas resonated with him.
Yeah, because I think there would be people, for example, who take issue with us labeling Reconstruction as the Second American Revolution or the Civil Rights Movement as the Third American Revolution for different reasons. One of them is that, actually you've referred to this before, but that people want to marginalize the Black freedom struggle and its place in world history and say, oh, it's a history of a particular group, but not the history of the nation. And so the reason why even like, let's say like American Communist Party people will be like, oh, we look back to 1776 is because they'll say this is the universal history, the universal revolution of the American people. And Reconstruction.
They say universal?
Or I'm interpreting.
Okay.
Like, and so they would say that Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement were not they were not universal for American history, and that they're more marginal. Whereas, well, I mean, even what I think is revealed in the Ken Burns, or like the way that the Ken Burns documentary frames it, is that not even everyone during the time of 1776 thought that the American Revolution like was for them. Like, and that was the historical process that unfolded. Like, it started in a very kind of a small niche subset of like, like especially like the New England colonies and all that stuff, and then gradually over time, more and more people are drawn into it and feel that their own interests are involved. And you can say the same thing about the Civil War and Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement, in which it reaches a point, part of the reason why we call them revolutions, American revolutions, is that you can say whatever you want, and I think there's a lot of, like historical amnesia, but that everyone, like that was really the point of the Civil War. Everyone felt that their future was involved. Everyone felt that their interest was involved, and that whether they liked it or not, you had a stake in the outcome of what happened with this struggle. And that is part of what King did so masterfully with the Civil Rights Movement, was to turn this question of segregation into a question that the entire nation had to contend with. It had to be, oh yeah, actually, like, no matter where I'm from, no matter what race I am, I have a part in this. Whether it's a good part or a bad part, I have to make a choice. And that is also like what Alice is saying is, no one started out before 1776 saying we want to become Americans. It was like literally they started out as British people and then became Americans. And that's also what like Baldwin is saying. It's like we will become a new people through the process of struggle. And I think that is part of one facet of what we consider the revolutionary process
Yeah.
is it results in the creation of a new identity for the people as a whole.
Yeah.
And like, it's not something that like going into it that you would even expect for yourself, but that through, like, I think you were saying this too, but that through the process of engaging in struggle, you become a new person. Your concept of self changes. Your concept of yourself as part of the nation also changes.
Can I ask a question that I feel like started brewing in my head, and I might not be able to quite land it the way I want to, but actually connecting all the things that we've been developing and thinking about in terms of like re-looking at the history of the development of capitalism, obviously the longue durée, but also like the global networks and like what all of this, like, is this also something, and I apologize if this is a really like a basic connection that has already been made. I'm just making it for the first time. Like, are these things actually supposed to actually, like all of the development, the processes of, say, capitalism or industrial development, they should have resulted in actually creating like a society in which like is an industrial economy and does place Black folk and give Black folk like a role to play that's not just enslavement, that is not just Jim Crow, that is not just, but like kind of worked out in that period that say in like the Great Migration and like the industrialization of these northern cities, but that's been taken away, and that like actually our study of capitalism, which is also in some senses like a study of development of the state, which I feel like was a really important thing that I kind of missed the first time listening to Sven Beckert. Also like a representation or like a crystallization of the history in the development of consciousness. Like all of those things should have actually resulted in a peace, industrial democracy or an economy, but it is not. So like, what's the reason for that? And also,
can I ask you to hold on 1 minute? These questions are so important as you are putting them.
yeah, I just hope it wasn't too left field.
See, no, because then by 1900 or 1903, a new articulation is necessary. The problem of the modern world is race and racial discrimination, which then leads Du Bois in many different ways to assert that race is not just an accident of US history, or even just an outgrowth of slavery. It becomes constituent of a new system that arises on the defeat of Reconstruction. You know what I'm saying? So does that make sense?
Maybe you should define constituent, because I feel that I have not quite.
Constituting.
Oh, constituent.
There might,
Can I say it again?
constituents,
Structures.
structure, but when you say constituting something, a constituent part, race carries this huge significance. And you're right, King was right. It's not just a matter of Black people, that's Baldwin too.
Right.
It is a matter of how the society is constituted based on the defeat of Reconstruction. That's what, I think all of these questions have to be put upon the table, but they then have to be answered or approached to a method towards answering them, which involves so many different, including logics of investigation, epistemologies, histories, and so on. But I think what we're talking, the question of the state, the question of race, the question of, I'll just leave it there. But, and capitalism, which according to Beckert, and this is, I think this will disappoint everybody when this part of him comes out, that he thinks that the history of capitalism ultimately is a history of the change of policies, from the New Deal to the neoliberal to the post-neoliberal, that it is a change of policy. He kind of, in that New York Times article, he kind of defers to that. which is such just a cop-out.
How could he explain something like the industrialization then, basically?
Absolutely.
That's like
absolutely.
my question.
He'll explain it as a policy.
Right.
And so anti-racism, to get rid of the color line, you have to institute policies. The question is, do you have to restructure? Do you have to restructure the state democratically? All of these questions. You know what I'm saying? That's.
Well, I mean, it's also this, like, who constitutes the state in order to create certain policies? Because if you keep the state in how it's constituted now, are they even able to create such policies?
No.
And
I would say no, I'm sorry.
no, I agree, which is that with the current state, it's hard to implement any policy that actually would benefit the people. And I mean, I think people work in different parts, and free school work in different parts of the society, and see how things get trapped up in just bureaucracy and talk rather than actually affecting change. I think actually another thing that stood out is this formulation of far from equilibrium dynamics, which is that these outliers, or what people would see, or I think white America sees Black people as outliers and therefore inconsequential. But history has shown that it's often or always outliers that actually move history forward, whether it's the American Revolution.
Most times.
Okay, yeah.
I would say most times. And that's why being in the outlier situation is a perfect place to be. If you're in a position of, first of all, if you're in a popularity contest, you're not in the revolutionary movement. But if you're not an outlier, you're not a revolutionary. I don't see how you can be one. So an outlier status is almost a verification of your identity for yourself. I mean, not all the time, but.
Yeah, but like something like a place like Montgomery,
was outlier.
Yeah, but then reshapes the whole nation. And
right.
Where was I getting with this? Far from equilibrium. Okay, I mean, whatever. Just
go ahead.
I do think. I forget where I was going with that, but essentially,
another thing, apropos logics, the concept of chaotic dynamics, where probabilities more than law are the rule.
Repeat that again.
Yeah. You're talking about far from equilibrium dynamics, but there's also the thing of chaotic dynamics, which comes out of quantum theory.
Chaos?
Yeah, chaotic
I
dynamics.
think there's chaos in classical systems also.
Oh, I didn't know that. But the point that I was making is a high state of uncertainty, where it's difficult to identify laws or regularities or pattern. You can't put a law on it because things are so uncertain. Sometimes the uncertainty arises from the inadequacy of measurement, or which it's physics, Heisenberg, or the inadequacy of theoretical and epistemological and logical tools on the part of the researcher. And so, that's why a lot of what we're doing is to perfect our tools, our ability to maybe see in the throes of what appears, because, by the way, let me just say this, the idea of chaotic dynamics, chaos, absolute uncertainty, can't remember. Come on, man. Chaotic dynamics.
It's like it's not deterministic.
No. It's the opposite of all determinisms, or at least. No, okay.
Spontaneous?
Ooh.
Like,
Those words.
what was Einstein's principle again?
Relativity.
Relativity.
No, this is, no, relativity is a law.
Oh, that's theory.
Mhm.
Oh,
It-
are you
but-
talking about attractive? I was thinking about attractive.
All right, move on.
dynamics.
We'll have worked this out by the time we get to your
Wow.
party, man.
Wow.
3 hours.
But what I'm saying is this, that this is why the study of logics is very, very important, because especially logics of probability, and this feeds right in to quantum physics, because everything goes crazy in terms of the standard model. Everything goes crazy. And their problem, up to and including string theory, reminds me so much of the problem of the social scientists. Without adequate tools, without,
Okay.
and this is why I kind of like Beckert. He's, you have to know things in order to understand a thing. You have to know things. You have to be well educated. This is why this narrow, specialized, almost positivist education, first of all, turns the student off, and first of all, leaves the student after they graduate, say, well, why did I waste my time?
And money.
And well, let's not even mention money, I mean, I paid for something I didn't get. But the problem is a pedagogy that does not link specific knowledge to general problems.
It's like if you consider King as a social scientist
Yes.
in that sense, like what Shantanu brought up, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? It's in some ways King asking a kind of probabilistic question.
No, it is.
And because like it
It's
became
an
a very
uncertain question.
it became a very real confrontation for King and the leadership of the movement is our movement going to spiral out of control into chaos? And that was the very real thing that they were facing with like all these urban uprisings and your generation who were dissatisfied and wanted to burn things down basically. And so it's an open question of like revolutions themselves. If a revolution is an assertion of human agency, how do you prevent it from spiraling into just chaos? And actually direct that agency towards a resolution of the problem. And that's, in some ways, it's this thing that you can never answer with definitive inevitability, but it has to be, in some ways, a probabilistic thing, because it is an act of human agency. There is always that law and chance element. And actually, it's funny because in the Black Odds kind of study group, we were reading this work by Du Bois, but we're like talking about Du Bois's method and how, especially in the earlier parts of his life and his career, a lot of what was driving him was like, Black people have not been studied at all. And if they have been studied, it's always been in the smallest and most narrow ways, and oftentimes racist assumptions. And he was like, we need to study Black people. And you can see him, like, I guess the way that we interpreted it was like, it's Du Bois working inductively of like, let me gather all of this information and then work upwards into theory. And I don't know, we were trying to make sense of what is deductive, what is inductive logic. And oftentimes I think in free school we do both. And it's not a one track thing, but that like, at least what I was reading online is that inductive logic requires some degree of probability. Because if you're making an observations about the world, and you're working upwards towards a theory that explains it, there has to be some degree of probability. Like, oh, okay, I see this, therefore, like maybe this explanation helps to clarify why it's happening. But you can never know for sure why it's that case, and it has to be some degree of probability, which you can then test with, I guess, deduction.
When you say probability, do you mean like there's a certain amount of assumptions that need to be made?
Well, it's actually what Jeremiah is saying is exactly what well, what's his name? Contopoulos. Actually, the point that you're making is the exact point that Contopoulos quotes, I think, Popper in terms of inductive and deductive reasoning, where inductive, where you have an observation but you make a theory, is probabilistic. But at least that's what Popper says. I didn't read the rest of Contopoulos. So Contopoulos, I don't know if Contopoulos is going to argue against it, but he says Popper is saying inductive. There's always assumptions, prior conditions. Like if you say you have an observation, can you make a general statement? But that general statement might not always be true. There's a certain level of uncertainty in it.
And can I just say one thing? This is very interesting what you say, and it gets us back to our reading group on Kant. You see, Popper is coming out of the British school, including John Stuart Mill, and the idea that we cannot draw any general laws until we have collected enough data. That is the inductive method. It is based upon that we can make general theoretical conclusions. Now, the question is, what is the criteria for the general theoretical framework? Well, I'm not going to say what the criteria could be. However, I just want to make the point, it differs completely from the rationalist Kant, who says that the initial condition is a set of categories, the categorical imperative. What Popper is saying, that the condition for knowing is to have data. You know, my last point, what Popper ultimately is concerned about is whether a theory is sufficiently consistent and adequately supported by data to be called a scientific theory. Now, you can use those two things, data and the quality of the theory, to either affirm or to falsify a theory. And for theory to, just a quick thing, for theory to be considered scientific, it must be able to be falsified.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But that is the analytic school. That is, I would say, the school of induction. And we can come back to that. Part is deductive. The rational.
Just blur so much.
We're trying to decide if we're pro-induction or anti-induction.
Well, the question is the deployment. And which you're thinking back to Cornell.
Well,
Just a few days ago.
But no, the question is, of course, the analytic school is basically inductivist. You know, ultimately, what it rested its hat on was the idea that a mathematical equation or set of mathematical equations could determine the truth, value, or truth or untruth of a theory.
And it's used in natural phenomena.
Actually, natural phenomenon. That's right. That's absolutely.
Like in terms of the sciences of like biology,
absolutely.
Inductive.
Physics. And that's what the quote promise of AI is. that you get the right algorithm, you can solve all the problems of science and so on.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like,
No, it's okay.
No, I mean, I'm thinking the same thing that Jana was asking, because I mean, this is what we were trying to deal with this week. But, I think, for instance, I think with the positivist logic, I think Popper is closer to that logic in the sense that,
There's no two ways about it.
you start with certain unstated assumptions. You start with a hypothesis, and then the search for, like what Alice was also saying, like you study the natural world, and then you sort of transplant it.
Can I ask you a question? See, I just think, I think it's a little bit reverse. I think rather than a hypothesis, you start with data.
But, I mean, the reason I'm saying this is because, like this is also the voice's initial argument that the only assumption that I start with is that a black man is a man.
Okay.
And that's the only assumption.
And that's a robust assumption.
But
Yes,
isn't
sorry, but go ahead.
I mean, that's the thing we were
Wait a
trying
second.
to
The
deal
initial
with,
condition.
because that's the only assumption that he has. But then what he is doing, his science, the voice in science, he's still, at least in the stage that Jeremiah was talking about, like this is pre-1900s almost. It was the end of the 19th century, where he's actually studying Black America. He's doing sociology. He's studying what are like he's studying Philadelphia, for instance.
Yes, yes.
And then he's coming to a theory, and theory of capacity of Black folk, and the revolutionary process and so on and so forth. But his assumption is he doesn't start with the assumption that Black folk have been the
problem,
or that Black folk have been at the center of the revolutionary process. That is sort of the answer he comes to.
He reaches
But he reaches that conclusion starting with the fact that the Black man is a man, and this is sort of what I mean. We were trying to deal with whether how to see this, because I agree that it seems to me. It is inductive and deductive. You do have certain you do have conditions. You do have certain criteria by which you judge theory. But then you also come up with something new.
I
might have it wrong.
No. Because I think the reason why also I brought it up is because there's the chapter on the Black proletariat in South Carolina, Black Reconstruction. He has a footnote at the beginning of the chapter where he's like, I am trying to study inductively the Marxian notion of the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Absolutely.
Rather than deductively.
Yes.
Because instead of him being like, Reconstruction was the dictatorship of the Black proletariat, yes or no? That's a kind of I don't know, it's it's a kind of deductive hypothesis. Whereas Du Bois starts from, okay, let me not do the yes or no thing, but let me just try to understand what this was to begin with, and allow that to enrich or to transform our understanding of what Marx called dictatorship.
And I consider that one of them. I think that's the most important footnote in the entire book.
Yeah.
That footnote, I will study inductively. And the one small point I would make is that I will base my conclusions upon data, the evidence. And the 30s was Du Bois's strongest period of criticism of the Communist Party, and they of him. And part of the critique of Du Bois was their lack of evidence. It's just statements and, that type of thing. Even to the debate got so fierce that the party, I guess it was the party, under the authorship of a guy named James Allen, wrote a book on Reconstruction, which was a critique of Black Reconstruction. His was called Reconstruction, A Struggle for Democracy, which would eventuate in Foner's book on Reconstruction, which with all of those pages, I mean, it's almost a throwaway in the face of Black Reconstruction.
I think this guy Beckert cites that a lot in Empire of Cotton, Eric Foner's book.
He cited, really?
Empire of Cotton.
Mercy.
Are there any comments? Yes, I will read some comments. Michelle Bell, Fired Plane, maybe Sophie, Todd, and Sparks all say good morning. Let's see. Gregory Baggett says, wow. Well, he didn't say wow, but Sven Beckert at the Saturday Free School is reading Capitalism.
We tagged him.
We tagged him?
I think that dude tagged him.
Oh, okay.
Oh, someone on Facebook
So
tagged
Sven
Sven Beckert,
Saying,
Oh, tag.
tagged the author on Facebook and
Saying
told
that.
Sven Beckert that we're reading. his
but
book.
but like, how would he know what the Saturday Free School is? Unless he already knows.
Yeah.
Maybe he does know.
The wheel within the wheel.
Okay, Michelle Bell said, I recommend the book Mickey Mouse History by Mike Wallace. It explains important intersections of corporate greed and interpretations of history. Parentheses, propaganda, all mixed with institutionalized racism. Okay, Bombalai has the flu. We hope you feel better. Todd says the spirit of America is the spirit of Massachusetts.
Where he's from too.
Yeah. Magna says the same way that the American people must understand the Russian Revolution through the Black lens, we must understand the American Revolution through the eyes of Du Bois, Baldwin, and King as revolutionaries, not as activists. They could think dialectically with a sense of responsibility for the future. Bombalai says, I grew up in California and 1776 is BS hype. It's cowboys and Yankee Doodle and I'm not gonna curse. But then says, loving hearing you all, 100 emoji. Magna said, I'm also interested in looking into the Black Panther Party's Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention in 1970. How it dealt with the American Revolution as a process. I think, because I was at the Advocate, and that was also called at Paul Washington. Okay, Bombalai said, gunpowder changed the world. They're into chaotic dynamics when we were talking about it. David Ball says, regarding uncertainty, we didn't know 40 years ago if we were going to survive when there are 72,000 nuclear weapons between two superpowers. And while we talk of socialism in the US. Okay, that's the end of the comments. Okay, thank you to our
Can I
comments.
just say about the gunpowder comment? Because I was thinking about that as well. Because Doc, you were saying, oh, well, the American Revolution constitutes, and correct me if I'm wrong, the American Revolution constitutes an axial age, a new beginning of an
Not the American Revolution, but it was part of an axial.
Part of the axial, that's right. And I was thinking about gunpowder, and gunpowder is invented by the Chinese way before its application to the way the Europeans used it for colonialism. And so I don't think it's just the invention of gunpowder, but it's application and its political and ideological application. So, because I was just thinking about that, what constitutes a revolution or the beginning of an axial age? So I don't think it's gunpowder necessarily. But maybe World War II, because of the way that war changed, in that it became more of a competition between systems rather than just violence, or the way that war changed. Because firearms changed the way that men and women do combat in such a way that women could possibly be equal to men, and but World War II changed things more than just gunpowder, because women were included in the workforce, women and African Americans were included, and that could never be reversed. We'll never see the world remove women from the workplace. So I was just thinking about axial age and whether or not science and technology, can constitute that.
Okay, I guess with that, we'll end. So see everybody next week.
Okay,
See you next week.
Oh, yeah.